This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Can I welcome members, officers and the public to today's meeting of the Transport Committee. Our main item of business today is a discussion on Transport for London's Taxi and Private Hire Action Plan 2025. And please make sure that your electronic devices are switched off or to silent modes. And can I also ask guests and members to position their microphones so they can be heard clearly. So if you can move them towards you when you speak, and then you can press the button when you're ready to speak. Can I start by asking our clerk, Hannah Barlow, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies received from Assemblymember Moema, for whom Assemblymember Mafous is substituting.
And can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? No? Can we note the committee's membership, chairing arrangements and terms of reference and the standing delegations of authority to me as chair as agreed by the London Assembly at its annual meeting on the 6th of May 2025? Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meetings held on the 27th of February and the 27th of March 2025 to be signed by me as correct records? And can I ask the committee to note the completed, closed and outstanding actions arising from its previous meetings and the additional correspondence received? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the actions taken by me as chair under delegated authority in consultation with party group lead members, namely to agree the committee's letter regarding the Department for Transport's consultation on a railway fit for Britain's future? The committee's report, there's more, we've done a lot. The committee's report, TfL's stalling car clubs. And I can, yes? Yep. Thank you. And can I ask the committee to note the response from the Minister of State for Rail to its letter on the Department for Transport's consultation on a railway fit for the future? Yep. Thank you very much. Now that's all done. So it's first meeting of the new year, so lots of business. Now we move on to our main item of business. It's a discussion of TfL's Taxi and Private Hire Action Plan 2025. And today's discussion will be split into 2 panels. And I'd like to welcome to the chamber our first panel of guests, representatives of private hire drivers. Thank you so much, all of you, at short notice, making the time to come and speak to us. So Abdurazak Hadi, who's London chair of the App Drivers and Couriers Union, Steve Garelick, regional organiser of the GMB, and Alex Marshall, president of the Independent Workers Union of Great Britain. That's right. So I'm going to start off with the first question. The first one's going to be quite a general question. We have lots of follow-ups on specific areas. So if I could ask you sort of to keep to like your main areas or headlines, and we'll do our best to give you some space wherever possible to expand. I just am aware that we might sort of answer everything in the first question. And also just to say, if at the end of the panel there's anything else that we haven't covered, you are very, very welcome to send in any further information. We're very, very keen to hear what you've got to say today. So, to the panel. Will the actions in Transport for London's Taxi and Private Hire Action Plan 2025 address the key issues that are affecting private hire vehicle drivers in London? Would anyone like to go first? Go for it, Steve.
I think we're not quite there yet. It's not meant on a pun for kids in the back of the car or the passengers. But the reality is there's some values in this, but it is lacking some substance. Certain aspects are not being addressed. And if I might, just before we set off on the path today, I just want to touch on the fact that there's the phrase for want of a horse the kingdom was lost, and at this stage there are monumental failures at TfL in relation to licensing actions of the new LARA licensing system, which weren't really taken out and in my opinion road tested, which have left members of the organisations present, I don't think there'll be any dissent, in a situation where they're not seeing their licences come through in a timely fashion. They're seeing the inbox not monitored on the on TfL's system when they're providing information. And if you want an action plan to work, you've actually got to have buy-in from the people who are actually going to be the main stalwarts behind this, and that's the drivers. And they're being let down on manifest level. So I think that's where to go. I mean, there are many points where the action plan doesn't address. We now believe there's a need for a transport commissioner, a taxi and private hire commissioner on a similar basis to New York, which actually takes control. And actually, private hire and taxi isn't relegated to the side stalls while other aspects of public transport are given consideration. We're talking over 110,000 individuals working on London's roads as private hire and taxi drivers, and credence needs to be given to their needs from a safety perspective, from a security perspective, from a pay perspective, where let's set aside the large operators. Let's look at the smaller operators who are skating by and getting away with not providing some of the benefits that they should be providing to workers out there. And the fact that the public have been sold on the idea of cheap fares, when in reality cheap fares don't cover the cost. So when this plan looks at what's good for the public, it seems to have sidestepped the drivers. I'll pause for the moment because I'm sure others will want to comment.
Many thanks, Steve.
Thank you all for having us here. I mean, the action plan itself, I looked at it, there are some good points, but a lot of points have been missed in here. And the main one is the capping the number of licenses that have been actually issued. I mean, they've talked about also fatigue, which both aligns together, the fatigue and licensing. What is actually causing the fatigue? It's people, actually, drivers out there working 16 hours, no control, and I'm sure that TfL have soft powers to introduce the number. I mean, if you are a driver of a bus driver in London, you only allowed specific time to work, and then you can also, you know, you have to have a break in between. And I've looked at it, there is a proper guideline, and this could be introduced. I mean, we're doing almost the similar thing. But the fatigue itself, if the TfL are thinking on a public side of it, this is dangerous basically to the members of public, it's dangerous to the passengers, and they're both related. And as you know, a comrade here said, basically the aspect of the earning of the driver and this effects of it. And I remember also Caroline Russell here quite a while ago. She came and visited me basically, and she knew that what we were going through. And also you, Ellie Baker, yourself, you've introduced basically workers' right to be the condition of licensing. That also needs to be addressed. And I didn't see that also on the... I've seen, you know, the toilets that they're going to be provided for these people, which is a good thing. But the bigger issue, I feel like it has not been addressed.
Thanks. Thanks very
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. So just to start off, I mean, it was probably, what, a year ago that people sort of fixated to the TV series that was outlining what happened at the post office when there was a change of systems that turned, you know, thousands of people's lives on their head needlessly, through no fault of their own, drove them into debt, drove them into all sorts of destitution. And I think currently with the licensing issues at TfL, we're seeing the equivalent crisis and scandal happening there. And we've seen this playing out for months. I'm not sure when the work went into this, but for there to be nothing within this report that says, you know, we're going to have equality with private hire drivers and taxi drivers, that means, you know, temporary licenses will be extended to drivers. There's no mitigation being outlined in this around licensing. So I feel there's a huge absence around licensing, and I mean, the two other panelists have also stressed this point, but as I said, this is a crisis of an equal scale to the post office scandal, and we are living through it at the moment, and we will be protesting once again at TfL today as drivers are still finding themselves out of work, as TfL are failing to deliver on their side of the deal when it comes to licensing. With the report, I do have to say it's very passenger-centric. I mean, reading through the report, you'd almost think that, you know, there are driverless cars in London already, because there is such a focus on passenger safety, on getting people from A to B, stuff around operators, but very, very little around the people behind the wheel. And I think this sort of shows where TfL are. You know, they say they want to keep passengers safe, but there's nothing about helping drivers stay safe. I mean, we have been campaigning as an organisation after one of our members was murdered 4 years ago working in Tottenham. We've been making basic demands around CCTV, around drivers not being deactivated when they're a victim of violent assaults within cars. We've been urging TfL to help regulate this side of things, and to date, we haven't seen enough happen. And I think this is a theme going through the report. You know, we hear about earnings, we hear about the want to sort of monitor more data around cancellations. There's nothing around pay. The reason around cancellations is because pay is plummeting. We're talking about the transition to green vehicles, but we're not talking about the fact that drivers using green vehicles are now getting paid less than people with petrol cars. You know, the whole incentive towards the green transition has been completely diminished by falling pay and conditions. So there's not enough talk around the regulation of the operators. I mean, we can talk about capping of licenses, but we can't look at it in a vacuum. You know, if you cap licenses, yeah, that's one thread that's contributing to a crisis of thousands of drivers in working poverty. So it's, again, there are threads in the report where there is some promise, but for the members we represent, they're not seeing enough substance in this, where it looks like TfL are taking an active step towards improving their lives. And that needs to start in the very immediate with the introduction of temporary licenses, a process around new applicants, but then there's stuff around safety, stuff around pay, so many different strands that I'm sure we're going to dig into, and I don't want to go too much into preempt conversation, but algorithmic transparency, the lack of scrutiny, and all of these things that I really think we need to have serious conversations about, because there's a mental health crisis with private hire drivers, there's a physical health crisis, there's so many things going on, and we need TfL to be taking some responsibility about this.
Thanks, and we are going to come on to many of those subjects that you've already raised, so thanks for that. So, Assembly Member, who's going first? Assembly Member Mahfouz. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to the panel. And you've all touched upon it. Clearly, the main issue for PHV drivers across London at the moment is the challenge with getting their licences renewed. We've also got, of course, issues with new applicants who are waiting for their applications to go through. For those who are waiting for their licences to be renewed, and there's a gap, then there's an impact in terms of, from a financial perspective, of a loss of income to them. What I wanted to ask from your point of view is so I'm just going to try and pin down some facts on this from your point of view. I'm inundated with emails, I'm sure colleagues right across are inundated with emails on this, and we were told, you know, if we sent the emails through to TfL, picked it up, they'd be escalated and expedited. There's still clearly a big challenge there, but when did you first know that there was an issue with this? When did you first pick that up? Steve, do you want to start?
It's been ongoing for some months now, and certainly with the implementation of the new system following the data breach fiasco, it's obviously become more intense. There's a second problem now where systems are saying where drivers license their vehicle and they upload it onto Uber, as an example. It's uploaded after it's been licensed at a testing centre, and then within a few hours it's being rejected by a TfL system saying that the vehicle licence isn't valid. So it's become worse because there aren't enough people to actually deal with the issues. I was at the AVA at Heathrow, which is the parking area for private hire vehicles, the other day. TfL sent down individual officers to look at the licences of drivers, which I have a major problem with in itself, because as far as I'm concerned, when the driver's in the AVA, they're on rest. And from my perspective, it's not the place to be approaching drivers to talk about their vehicle or their personal licences. Those individuals at this stage would be better employed getting drivers back on the road and doing the paperwork. They can go back out and do enforcement at a later stage, but the place they should be right now is behind a desk getting people back on the road. At this stage, we are now looking at what we can do to take legal action to recover the losses that drivers have had as a result of not being on the road. At the very least, in my opinion, TfL should be refunding the drivers for any delays. If you went into any company and requested service and they failed to give the service, you would expect a refund. Drivers are not getting the service. And at the same time, as has already been commented on, these are individuals who have already made major commitments towards vehicles. They have tax to pay. That will come up within a few weeks. They have food to put on the table and families to feed. And the reality is there is a nonchalant attitude at this stage about speed and how this should be done. And it is absolutely wrong, because it really is impacting loads. Just on one point, because it is slightly odd, we are talking about the re-licensing of drivers, but are concerned about the drivers who haven't got their licences, and at the same time we're talking about caps. Now, I recognise that a cap can only come from government legislation, and the comment has been made, maybe there are other mechanisms that can be made. Theoretically, of their own making, TfL has created a delay, but the reality is people are trying to get into this trade because they're hoping it will get them out of poverty in other workplaces where they're working 0 hours, where they are treated badly by their bosses, and they are seeking a way out into what looks like a yellow brick road. But unfortunately, with the way that prices, behaviours of some operators has occurred, things are not right on this front.
Thanks. Can I just jump in gently there? Just to say we are going to talk about CAP and the implications later on, so I don't want to cut across, but just to let you know, we will have the opportunity to say that before we all pile in.
I had the opportunity in September to come and meet Ellie Baker, and I've raised a couple of things. Renewals, capping, and workers' right. That basically tells you when I've raised the renewal of licensing from September, the issue started at that time. And then I remember sitting down with the TfL on the 5th of March. I've raised this issue and I said, the only solution to this is temporary licensing. It was pushed away. The only way we got that is when I went crying to Ellie Baker, saying to her, this is that bad at the moment. And then basically that, I don't know what happened. Then an emergency meeting basically took place. And Alex, you are there, and then, I mean, they've decided basically to issue. And this is, as a colleague here said, it doesn't only affect your living cost, because at the beginning of the week, a driver is minus of almost £300. You've got the vehicle to pay, you've got basically the insurance, and you've got your, you know, by the time you make anything, it's Wednesday, or probably Thursday. So imagine then every week you are £300 less, for as long as the period it takes that you don't have a license. And up to today, there's not any improvement. People still coming to cry. And the problem of this is over-licensing. And now it's coming to bite TfL, because why? They've over-licensed for license. Then everybody now needs their license to be renewed. The issue is we don't have the manpower. And what's the solution to it? We're going to actually increase the fee for the licensing. That's exactly what they said. That's not the solution. The solution is have enough people to deal with this, but capping, stop it. Because this is just going to carry on and carry on, basically. You're going to over-license, all of these licenses need to be renewed at the end, so they're all going to pile up at the same time.
Thank you. And Alex?
So I would like to politely disagree with the other panellists. I mean, I think this issue has been ongoing for a number of years. It's something that our casework team and the private hire drivers branch has dealt with long term, where TfL have been failing to renew licences before they've expired. I think TfL would like us to look at this within a 6-month time frame, because they want us to look at it like it's a crisis that needs to be dealt with in the short term. However, this is something that is long-term investment. It needs complete reform, and it stems to inequality between black cab drivers and private hire drivers. There is no reason why there should be a different process around the two different forms of drivers. And TfL want to say this is a result of a cyber attack and the transition to a new system, and I don't doubt that exacerbated the issue, but the issue has been there long term. And I think if they put the resources in place, if they put the measures in place in the form of temporary licenses, if a driver sends in a completed renewal pack, if they're heading towards the expiry date and they have not renewed that driver's license, they can issue a 1-month, 2-month, 3-month license. That means they're still able to process and ascertain any additional information within that time. I think it's a problem of TfL's own making, and the drivers are being made to pay. And as Hadi and Steve have both said, these drivers, they start the week in debt. They have to work 35 hours before their head's above the water, and then they start to make money. These guys are cashing out on a daily basis. I don't know if you guys know how that works, but every single day they can press a button that means that money goes into their bank account, and they're charged to do that. But many drivers are doing that so they can put fuel in their vehicles, so they can put food on the table. There is no safety net. And on top of this, due to the lack of resources, you have a process where drivers are off the road, they're being asked for additional medical information. TfL don't have the capacity to actually see the emails coming in, so they're being asked again and again for the same information. And some of this information, it comes at a cost. You have to go for ECGs and other medical tests. They then expire. So drivers are being charged more and more to get through this process. So, I mean, that's my position. This stems from an unequal process, and it stems from a lack of investment and resourcing to a department that desperately needs it. And as a result, drivers who are already struggling are being kicked when they're down.
May I just address another point which is quite important here, that has been brought up in relation to the cost of engaging medical practitioners to do work on licences.
We're already out of time, so yeah, if you could make
just to say that there's a big problem that the BMA allow doctors to choose their rates, which means you've got a disparity of cost for drivers as well. And the fact that when you need step tests and other tests, they are either hard to come by because of appointments via the NHS, or they come at an incredible cost of £600 to £800 sometimes, which is just ridiculous. There needs to be almost a one-stop shop and a fixed rate.
That's really helpful.
Yeah, super quickly. So, Hadi, thank you. So you said in terms of sort of raising it with TfL in September, and obviously we've heard that the excuses have changed over that period of time as to why the rationale for that. Alex, very clear, actually, this has been an ongoing issue. And I guess if I was being devil's advocate, TfL might say this new system is there to try and support that longer term challenge. But actually, Steve, you've made the point, even the new system is not working properly we're not uploading it properly. Sorry, because so just in terms of Hadi, you raised it in September. Alex, Steve, when did you raise this, and when had they offered you anything by way of dealing with it ahead of this latest?
When I raised it in September, it was at the boiling point. Where I agree with Alex. This is actually, and specifically when there's actually, you have to go for a medical. I'm just quickly, I'm going to give you a sample. We had a member basically clearly on the note. His GP says he doesn't need that test, but TfL insisted, so he had to go and pay almost £600 privately to get that test, which he didn't need. And his GP said, if you need it, I'll send you to NHS, but you don't need that test. And I don't know whether the people who actually work at the TfL who look at this medical, are they better than the GPs out there who are actually appointed by the...
Sure, I just want to stay focused at the moment, though, just in terms of what did TfL say in those meetings that you had last year, you know, over 6 months ago, in terms of
primarily
the
they
level of
spoke
resourcing?
to the cyber attack as being their biggest issue. But it is fair to say that over the years there's been an excuse when drivers are scrambling to find out what's happening, and unfortunately they generally come to us at the last minute rather than at an early stage. TfL then routinely say, we've written to the individual. Well, frankly, these, you know, they've got the worst post service on earth, because nothing is reaching these individuals to find out that they suddenly need a further test. It's only when we make the inquiry that they find out, and it's a consistent issue.
Thanks. Yeah, look, I just want to say, I know it's a massive issue. We are going to have to... Assemblymember McCarthy, do you want to come and briefly on this? And then we'll have to move on. Although, if there's any more information you want to pass on to that, I know we already have lots, please do. We're going to have to move on from the issue.
Can I say, I mean, I've had a lot of inquiries from drivers who haven't actually been able to get their licence or applying. I mean, I have one here well over a year. But the constant complaint, apart from the delay, is the fact that no one answers the phones and there isn't a counter service to go and actually speak to someone in person. Have you asked TfL for that, and what has been their response?
If I can jump in. So, I mean, we've had various meetings with TfL, and we've also had various protests where drivers have wanted to go outside and demand some answers. We have had some concessions in the form of, you know, faster delivered licences. They introduced the temporary licences, which aren't actually fit for purpose. Many of the drivers aren't actually getting them due to ongoing information being needed. When we raised the lack of communication, they said that it wouldn't be used, a lack of capacity, that they can't have a phone line. They said that they're getting hundreds of emails from drivers that they're unable to kind of stay on top of. And actually yesterday, I got an email from Dan Maskell, who's one of the lead stakeholder, I forget his title, sorry. And he actually asked me if we were able to start attaching the information that is requested from drivers. So that what they're doing at the moment is they'll have an application, they'll say, we don't have your DVLA code. They'll send something back to the driver, who they're literally refreshing their email boxes, like desperately waiting to be licensed. As soon as they get that email, they will send it directly back. However, it seems that TfL are unable to monitor the emails coming in, so they're now asking us to do that work for them. So it's clear that they're unable to deal with the volume currently. They're not putting in enough capacity. And to be honest, what we've seen more recently is in March and April, we were putting a significant amount of pressure. There was press around it as well. We saw that they had team members working on the weekends, working outside hours. Drivers were actually getting emails. But more recently, we've seen it spike again, because it seems like TfL are thinking that they've managed the crisis, that maybe the press won't return because they've already reported on it, and things are starting to bubble up again. So I think one of the key issues is the fact that they're treating this as a PR issue rather than being accountable to the drivers who they're messing around. And I cannot believe that a union is being basically asked to do the admin work for an organisation that has access to huge amounts of money and should be doing this. It should be very straightforward. If you ask someone for information, you then look out for the email, you add it to their account, you issue the licence. So that was an email that I received yesterday that shows the issue is still very much prevalent.
I think we're going to have to curtail this, but we will be putting this to TfL next month as well. But perhaps, Chair, we could ask for any details to be sent to us about those meetings and what's been said or promised. That would be really helpful for us.
Just very, very briefly, last week there was a stage where that inbox actually became full, and we were made aware that actually it couldn't actually receive any more emails.
That's happened numerous times.
Yeah, which is...
where drivers are getting bounced back.
Okay.
I mean, I did raise this issue of the inbox being full, and I was told there's no problem. Then what we did is we've sent the screenshots to them, telling them this is exactly, because it was bouncing back saying the inbox was full.
perhaps send us those screenshots.
I'm quite
as
happy
well.
to do it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's
yeah,
really
I mean,
helpful.
we have across all of us. I know that I've certainly got information from all of you as your organisations, and what we'll do is I'll sort of communicate and we'll pass that on so we can get that in one central place and get a picture of that, if that's all right. So we'll come back to you. But anything else that we don't know, feel free also to send that on, and we'll put that in.
And sorry,
Okay.
just last thing. You see, the reason the inbox was full, it goes back to what Alex said. You've been asked the same thing over and over again, so you have to
Yeah.
resend it and send it again.
Yeah.
So, of course, what are you going to get out of it?
So it seems that there's obviously a staffing problem, but there is also a systemic problem, clearly, because it's that people are wasting their time, obviously, doing work that doesn't need to be done at both sides. Anyway, I'm abusing my chair's privilege there. Thank you for that. I know how important that issue is, so we've spent a bit of time on that, and thank you very much, and we will definitely ask you for more of that detail so we can pick up. And now I'm going to Assembly Member... Well, you're over there now.
Yeah,
Assembly Member Bakari. Sorry. For question 2. Yes.
I mean, we've been hearing a lot from the panel already about the headlines were very clear, but I just want to ask a specific question about the impact the increase of apps have had on private hire operators. You've talked about well-being, you've talked about safety, you've talked about the passengers, but what's the most impacted group from the increase of apps themselves?
The increase of the apps itself, it's more drivers on the road, and you've been squeezed, basically, on your earning. I have been a driver myself since 2008. The fares that I used to get in 2008, now they've gone down. But the cost of actually me running that vehicle, it has gone up. And the only way I can substitute this is for me actually to be on the road for longer and longer hours. And this is where the fatigue kicks on. Then I'm tired at the end of the day, and I'm not getting younger, and that's the only job I know. So you can imagine, basically, I mean, and I can see here TfL have actually raised this issue. If you look at the number of licenses in London alone from 2010 up to today, they've actually doubled. And if you look at this, when the app companies have actually came on board, when there used to be the local mini clubs and so on, look at the numbers and look at the numbers today, it's completely different. It has increased dramatically. And this, it has given the driver who's actually been on the road less earning, in the sense like, and less protection. The app companies, they're big. They're not like the local companies when they used to be there, that, I mean, where basically if there's any issue whatsoever, a driver will be called into the office and we'll discuss with them what's going on. The biggest problem at the moment you have is deactivation. The drivers will be kicked out of the platform, and then you've leased a car, you've leased everything, you've got nothing, you left the other, whatever you were doing, and you're doing this for a year, and you're left with nothing. And this is basically, it does drive people into mental issues, and I've seen people coming in and saying, like, I feel like killing myself, being deactivated of the platform. And when you get deactivated, you could be accused of something that you didn't do. I mean, and a passenger will do that in order basically just to get a refund. I'll give you an example which didn't happen in London, and this happened actually in Brighton a couple of years ago. What happened is he was accused of actually molesting a passenger. Brighton Council, CCTV is mandatory. So what happened is the council basically, when this was sent to the council, they've asked the driver to bring in the CCTV. The driver did. Clearly there's nothing, so they've cleared the driver. But what happened is Uber wouldn't take them on. The only way Uber then would take that, then we said, look, the council cleared him, there's a CCTV, look at it. They're not interested to look at that CCTV. And then we had to basically push it, speak to the local councillors and so on. That's the only way. When they were embarrassed and they look at it, it's mainly a PR, then they took that driver on board. That is exactly what the driver is facing.
Yeah,
I have faced these problems myself as a driver over and over again, where I was accused. I remember this was exactly 2022. I came back from holiday. August, I was accused of actually holding a passenger hostage. And they wouldn't tell me, who is it? Right. And what happened is we went to Amsterdam because there was a case, so I raised it there. And then Uber actually intervened and said, and I offered to give them CCTV and so on. They were not interested. But the accusation itself to be on me is a big issue. We have some of the guys basically who are actually law students. And imagine they've been accused of such a thing like that. What will happen?
It affects their future.
Exactly.
Would you like to come in? I can see Alex.
Yeah, I just wanted to, with the example of Uber, I mean, they're emboldened at the moment. They've been doing this for 10 years, and they will openly say that their path to profitability has been decimating competition. They've knocked out all the local operators pretty much. They now have a monopoly in multiple cities, and they will openly say that with that, they're going to drive down the pay of drivers. With that will be discontent.
So the increase of apps have meant payment is now going to be dropped for all drivers.
Yeah,
right.
And they've openly said that now that they're turning a profit. Recently, they said they're finally recording a profit after sinking billions into becoming the market leader. That discontent will be part of the model. There could well be protests, but they're happy to have this as part of their model. And you know, TfL and other licensing authorities are openly allowing this predatory operator who happily says that workers will be struggling and will be protesting, but that's just part of their model. And that's what the increase of the likes of Uber and other operators, that is part of their DNA. That is how they operate. And with the lack of scrutiny, the lack of transparency around algorithms, the way that they seem to be able to say, you know, drivers are happy with flexibility, the majority of our drivers are very happy, and there is no scrutiny around that. However, you know, all three of us on this panel won't disagree in the fact that the majority of drivers are not happy. You know, they do enjoy the work, the freedom sometimes, but the pay and conditions, it's unacceptable, and that's why they're joining the different unions and fighting back.
Do you want to come in, Steve?
Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, you know what, I aspire to be a private hire driver. They don't. Some may aspire to be a taxi driver because it's a family tradition, a fire person, a police person. But they don't aspire to be private hire drivers. They've taken that path to put food on the table because wherever they've been in life, they haven't got where they wanted to go. And I'll give you a very, very brief example before I answer your question further. I sat in a training room for new reps. I had 8 reps who were all private hire drivers in the room. How many of them had degrees? 8. How many of them were doing masters? 4. How many already had masters but weren't able to get on the ladder of alternative employment based on race, religion, creed? That's the reality. So you've got a very, very bright set of people who are feeling more decimated and more oppressed. Every other week, a new Wowie Zowie app comes along that hopes to attract individuals. But as we know, the name of Uber is ingrained into the public mindset. Now it's used on TV shows. I'll catch an Uber. And therefore, de facto, it is the most powerful app. But it's also being enabled by licensing authorities such as Wolverhampton to give out licenses like Sweeties, which again have an effect because you see a creep into other areas. And this has an effect then on drivers' incomes. The apps that come in, or operators such as Addison Lee, where we wrote to TfL complaining that 2 directors have actually falsified information for a tribunal, and their fit and properness to be an operator, which seems to be glossed over by TfL, means that they're also getting enablement. Operators come along, and you know, I started driving over 40 years ago on a private hire basis, and there's always been good or bad operators, but this presumption, well, you can go somewhere else, isn't the case anymore, because Uber theoretically are where people really need to earn money, and the other operators are sideshow operators. So whatever comes along may come along, but the plan, the long-term plan, based on Travis Kalanick's thesis, was to move towards full automation. AI. Which has just been spoken to, algorithm. And part of the reason that drivers, as Hattie's mentioned, aren't readmitted is that operators are worried about catching a cold when an allegation has been made. So the AI says, you know what, there could be a risk with this person. And even though human nature would be to say, well, you'll give them a second chance based on a false allegation, AI tells people maybe not.
Thank you. Alex, I do want to ask a very quick question with the Chair's permission very quickly, because you said that the plan was very passenger-focused rather than driver-focused. And one of the things that the report said was that 1% of private hire vehicles can be designated as wheelchair accessible. What are the challenges for the private hire vehicles to increase that number? I think in some ways the plan was criticising that the fact that there were less disabled access vehicles, and how does that impact the drivers and the people that you represent?
So I think Hattie might also be able to touch on this as a driver, but just very briefly, I mean, it's affordability of vehicles. A lot of drivers are being forced into driving certain vehicles rather than actually choosing what vehicles they're driving, but also the accessibility of routes. I think often we hear of drivers who have picked up a disabled passenger who, due to LTNs or other road restrictions, are unable to access the quickest route. And as Hattie said as well, this would lead to complaints, which will then lead to deactivations because they think a driver is trying to extend the route and get more money, when actually they're unable to access the fastest route and get someone right outside their front door, and it's just not worth the risk. So that can really feed into whether or not people will be taking disabled passengers and choosing a vehicle that will allow that.
Hannah, if you don't mind me coming in, thanks, Alex, on this specific issue. The decrease of the original vehicles that could actually pick up the disabled passenger, I'm talking about the black cab. So a lot of these passengers will be forced to come into the private hire. And the problem is we're having here, it's when you get a job at the beginning, you don't know whether the passenger is disabled or not. But if the big apps, basically, if they put that feature to say whether you have a guide dog or whether you're on a wheelchair, that gives the driver, and that basically what it triggers from the beginning, it triggers the equality right. So that then I know the passenger is disabled, I will prepare myself where to stop, exactly the issue he raised, and in the sense like, I mean, I know where I'm allowed to stop and I'm not allowed to stop. I mean, I cannot stop on a bus stop, for example, and then I can prepare myself from the beginning if this feature was there. But then because this feature is not there, I don't know if the passenger is disabled or not. I could go and say to the passenger, like, I'll give you an example for myself. I went to pick up a passenger a couple of weeks ago, January, and this was in Golders Green. I remember very well, the passenger was actually on a bus stop. So I couldn't park on the bus stop, then I went basically parked somewhere else. The passenger was fuming at me, saying to me, like, I'm disabled. I don't know. And then he pulled out a card showing it to me that is actually on dialysis. So he went to the vehicle next to him. If I would have known, I would have called him, would have parked the vehicle somewhere, gone and assist him, and so on. And what happens is, though I picked him up, and I'm sure he made a complaint, because the next morning, on Monday, when I woke up, my app was actually closed. So then when I called Uber to ask them exactly what's going on, they wouldn't explain to me exactly what's going on. So we're going to see a lot of disabled passengers moving towards here. And the other option you could have here, you could force the operators to have at least 10% of the vehicle to be wheelchair accessible vehicle. And so this burden is also on them, not on the driver. And if they want to employ these drivers basically to drive these vehicles, it's up to them. But I mean, I didn't see this. I mean, on the action plan itself.
Can I just speak on WAV in general terms?
Really briefly, Steve, we are
quite important.
way
First
behind.
and foremost, for setting aside the cost of a wheelchair accessible vehicle, there is definitively a need for this, but drivers move away from it because of the extra time and expense in undertaking these journeys. Especially, I would also say that not everyone who has a disability needs a wheelchair accessible vehicle. The problem is also that from a risk assessment perspective, a dynamic risk assessment, if you've got somebody my size in a wheelchair that you're expecting a driver to get up a ramp into a vehicle, the probability is that the driver will not want to accomplish that based on the fact that they're likely to cause themselves injury. I happen to deal with ambulance staff as well who work for DHL amongst others, and I can tell you one of the sole causes, or main causes I should say, of staff being on a sick basis is primarily based on the fact that they sustain injury whilst undergoing the work that they're doing. And if you want WAV on the road, it needs to be paid correctly, and either local government or government needs to be subsidising those journeys.
Thanks very much. OK, we're really running behind. So, Assembly Member McCartney.
Thank you. And I want to ask about driver earnings, if I can. And I think all of you have mentioned the introduction of Uber's dynamic pricing. Could you just briefly outline what effect that has had on drivers and whether the new action plan actually deals with that appropriately? I don't know who wants to go first. Done.
I get this question from the members. I myself, as a driver, I don't understand up to today how this dynamic pricing works. If I did, I could have explained to you how this dynamic pricing works. I see fares differently at different times and so on. And the dynamic pricing, let me tell you, it has not actually helped drivers in any way. And they called it basically a smart pricing, and I always said it's a smart way of cheating passengers and the drivers. It's not clear on how much you're actually exactly getting. And when you dispute, you don't get... there's no transparency in here.
So if I book a cab and it costs me £15, do you know that I've paid £15 for that?
No, I don't. And there's a possibility there, probably 45% of what you paid would go to Uber. A lot of passengers up to today, they think it's 25%. No, it's not. It's between 35% to 45%. That's what Uber would take, basically.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alex.
So I think the way it works, and there is like a huge issue with the lack of transparency around algorithms and just how much commission they're taking, how much the passengers paid. Often when drivers talk to the passenger, they'll see it's upwards of 40% that they're taking. But I think the way it works is it's the lowest bidder wins. Uber will start low and they'll start to go up depending on rejection rate, but due to there being no floor and the huge competition, there's an insane amount of competition of so many drivers on the road, and they're preying on the desperation of drivers that they can start low, and most of the time someone will take that trip because they've been sat around for 2 hours rejecting jobs, and finally they think, I'm going home, I'll take the job, or for whatever reason someone will take the job. But because of the lack of regulation and the lack of transparency, they can just start low and bid up. But most of the time, someone will take that low price, and it's just a complete free-for-all. And I think that's essentially what they packaged as dynamic pricing. The lowest bidder wins.
I mean, the recent court cases that Uber and Bolt have both lost now say private hire vehicle drivers are employees and therefore entitled to the minimum wage. Is there any transparency at all that they are working out their rates to at least pay you that?
No, you get a final tally for journeys, but the reality is there needs to be a minimum living fare for London that drivers know that they're going to earn, that they're not sent journeys which literally would be cheaper than when a family takes a bus. It just doesn't make sense, and that's very much the same as where things came from with ride sharing, where the drivers put in the precarious position of taking individuals who have never met each other, getting into a vehicle uphill and down dale, and that costing them, and then finding out really for the work they've done and the risk they've had with having individuals who may be at odds with each other in the back of a vehicle, that they could be also susceptible to verbal or physical assault. So, you know, ultimately you're asking people to do journeys for low money, not just on one platform alone. I'd say that it's across platforms, and in quite a lot of operators' cases where, frankly, they're not that brilliant, and they've never been that brilliant. And the fact that there's also these other inherent risks when people embark on the journeys that people tend to forget. So it's about putting food on the table, but it's also about when you get to an electric charge point and you've got to pay 86p per kilowatt hour because you suddenly run low because you've been doing all of these cheap journeys.
Okay.
Can I add something
please.
where Alex said, basically? Alex said that the driver would wait for 2 hours and then they desperate to take that fare. He's absolutely right. And what I would add from there is that now Uber have actually communicated with us, the drivers, saying, before we look at the journey and we think it's not worth a while, let it go. And now they're saying if you do that, then that means basically that we're not going to prioritize you to send your work. So you have to take that lowest fare as soon as possible so that passenger is not stranded. And so we don't have to increase that fare. That's exactly right. And I've seen drivers panicking saying, so if it's not worth a while and I think like it's going to take a long time or whatever, so that means I'm going to wait for a longer time, and probably that's how the algorithm that it's going to go, and the drivers will be forced even to take lower and lower fares.
Okay, and
just very quickly, sorry, just to add with the minimum wage commitment, there is no commitment to whether that's per job. It's completely open to how they move the goalposts. You know, they can say, you know, they'll do that over the course of a week, or they'll do that over the course of a month, and they can make sure that it's over a certain amount of time. But we see regularly that a job that a driver will take will 100% pay them less than minimum wage once you've factored in the costs, the deviations on the route, and all of these different factors. But they will just say that over time, drivers will be making this money. So they are left with sort of carte blanche to kind of move things around and rearrange things because, again, lack of regulation, lack of scrutiny into these numbers, they're just sort of given an open door to kind of do what they want.
Okay, so there's an issue about transparency and knowing what you're being hired out for, actually, isn't it? And I think there's also an issue with waiting periods and whether they're calculated as well. But I've noticed that Uber as well, now at times of high demand, will quote a price, and then if you're still going to get a driver, they'll say, are you prepared to pay an additional fee to have your journey prioritised? And I've always wondered, does that go to the driver or not?
That doesn't go to the driver. Definitely doesn't go to the driver.
Yeah.
Trust me on it. And
so it's a bit like tip, but it's not like tips because it's your basic earnings.
No, exactly. So it's not going to go into the driver. Yeah. And I'll give you an example of the waiting time. I received an email on Monday. Someone actually exactly calculated what they've worked, and they looked at it and they said, but this does not reflect the number of hours of work. So I didn't even actually, and can you explain to me? And I said to him, you don't get paid a working time. Uber will only pay you from the time you have the passenger on board to the time you drop them off. And even if you calculate that, as Alex said, I mean, majority of the time it's not exactly, and everybody's expenses is different. I mean, because of my age, I'm lucky to have an insurance a bit cheaper, but if you're 10 years younger than me, I'm almost 50, your insurance is going to be even higher. So your expenses are more higher than myself.
Okay.
So, but they only have one calculation, and they have a calculation of 45 pence per minute HMRC, which actually goes back decades. And that's not designed for private hire vehicles. It's designed for a private vehicle where the insurance is cheaper, and you don't need specific vehicle to be on a specific whatever. It's not fair.
Just really quickly, I mean, the reason you'll be waiting longer to be picked up is nothing to do with a lack of drivers. That's down to pay. The reason drivers are rejecting jobs is because the pay's not high enough. There's an abundance of drivers who could be picking up people any time of day, but the reason those jobs are being rejected is because the pay is so low. And that's the reason. And they won't be seeing the pay. It will be eventually there'll be a driver who just accepts that job.
One of my peeves as well is that, I apologise for this, but if you go onto an Uber app and look at the map of where you are, it shows us loads of drivers around you. As soon as you accept it, there's no drivers in there. So it misleads the customers as well.
I'll give you a good example.
Yeah.
As I said, I was at the AVA at Heathrow the other day, and I was talking to drivers, and routinely journeys were coming up, and they were ignoring them on the phone. They weren't even hitting reject, because frankly the cost value after sitting in the AVA for several hours, and I was with one driver, an exec van driver, who'd sat there for 5 hours. And the cost for the parking alone in the AVA, once you get beyond a certain point, is ridiculous. But it wasn't worth his while to move for some of those journeys that were being, offered out.
Yeah. And Steve, while you're there, I know you've raised concerns about Uber's trip radar, about the danger that really puts drivers in competition with each other.
GMB has raised multiple questions at meetings over trip radar. We obviously, I know my colleague Eamon wrote to TfL also in relation to concerns about trip radar. I know Hadi definitively has comments on trip radar as well.
I have. I mean, on the last meeting when I went to TfL, I was asked for the agenda, and I've put a trip radar, but it was never brought in. But then Kola, who was there, he did raise that, but he was just pushed away. He said, like, Uber can do whatever they want to do. In that sense, we have no powers. But the point is, there's a danger. We said there's a danger on trip radar. The driver is driving, and these have been sent to them, and they have to touch the phone and accept it or actually reject it. And you basically have to focus on that and to read the job. So what we're saying is the trip radar itself is danger, basically, to the... And it's forcing the driver...
respond within 10 seconds, you're pitted against other drivers.
It's not just that. Look, the reality is that if you... Also, depending on an officer's interpretation when it comes to action with a mobile device, this is leading a driver potentially into a 6-point situation and revocation of their licence immediately. I've asked Uber, and I would like other operators to take the mantle on of voice activation and voice response to be able to at least command a device rather than have to touch or use a device. But ultimately, the expectation that you can do all of the things you're supposed to do, just the same as I don't believe drivers should be disc jockeys and playing somebody else's music when they're in a car, is basically some of the expectations when it comes to use of Bluetooth and other devices within a vehicle, interaction with devices. None of this is helpful, especially if you were to put, I'm sure if we got a university to put an individual in front of a device in a driving situation, they would find that there would be fundamental systemic issues with that in itself.
Yeah, so TfL is saying that issues regarding drivers' paying conditions for specialist tribunals are not something they can regulate, but you're saying, but the use of the app-based issues is a real issue on safety, and therefore they should be addressed in the action plan.
When an operator makes any changes to terms, conditions, apps or anything else, are expected to give TfL an update. For what then? Oh, so they've told them? So somebody at TfL can scratch around the edges but do nothing. The reality is we understand that TfL is a licensing authority to protect the public. I understand that. But at the same time, who is protecting the drivers and doing the right thing by them? Who is challenging operators when they have nefarious practices, when they keep drivers' insurance money, or they shut down and then set up under another guise further down the line? It is like the Wild West for operators still, and there are plenty getting away with blue murder.
So one more issue in regards to the tribunal.
So you're saying that TfL should be addressing these issues in the action plan, and perhaps there's a role for national legislation as well. Would that be
exactly?
I think it's you've touched on the fact that it's a public health issue, and that is well within TfL's remit. When they are introducing dangerous practices that are increasing, the use of phones, they're increasing the dangers on the road. This is absolutely something that TfL should be intervening on. And also, as you said as well, that, TfL should be pushing for regulatory powers to be able to be making bigger interventions against operators who are just running wild on the streets of London.
Joanne, in regards to that, if you read the judgment of the last tribunal against Bolt, what they've said is they put on the terms and condition that a driver can substitute the work to another driver. That's against the TfL regulation. why would they raise that basically in the tribunal, lying to the judge, knowing this? So when I went and raised this issue to TfL, I was just told basically, look, we haven't read the judgment. And then when I pushed and I said, it's there, or we can't comment on this. If I would have done that as a driver, I would have lost my license. Why is Bolt up to today have the license? And another thing is Addison Lee. They've lied to the judge, said we've sent these letters to the driver saying you can cancel your job whenever you want. And those, in fact, those letters never went out. Why were they allowed to lie to the judge and nothing happens to them exactly? And where are the regulators here to regulate that?
Thank you. I think we've got lots of information to put to TfL next time on that. So that's really helpful. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Assemblymember Tyrrell, if you've got a brief clarification,
Yes, thank you. Just a very quick point of clarification, Hadi. You mentioned earlier when to Assemblymember McCartney about that when you're doing Uber, you can't see the value of the journey, or you can't see how much a customer is paying. When I've been in the back of an Uber and a job has come up, I can see a value on there. Could you just clarify for me what that value I'm seeing in the back is? Is that the total of the job, or is that the total the driver will get paid?
That's exactly the total the driver will get paid, basically. And by the way, I mean, and we can see it and we can reject it. It doesn't reflect exactly how long it would take me to, for example, say I mean, I live in northwest London. I pick a job from northwest London and it's saying it's actually going to Gatwick. The way Uber will calculate that job is to go through basically the longest.
Just for time, I've got the clarification that I needed. Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, much appreciated. Assemblymember Mahfouz.
So my question, don't worry, I'm not asking you to answer it today. We just don't have time, sadly. But I will ask, because we're also not just relevant for this committee, but we're also looking at devolution in another committee that I'm chairing. So as part of the action plan, it states that TfL will call on the government to give it powers to mandate data sharing. Right? You've obviously given a number of things where you'd like to see that data sharing happen, but if it was granted that power, it'd be great to get in writing from you, just in terms of what you would want to expect TfL to have in terms of data sharing from the private hire drivers to support them. Okay? So if you could just send that to us in writing. From the app. So what information would be useful for us to be able to have as TfL from the apps that would help support those drivers. And as I say, Steve, no need to jump in now, but just to we'll put it in writing as well.
We will write to you with that.
Want to say that there needs to also be the consideration of being forgotten and your data being struck. Because, frankly, we just don't want operators being able to manipulate that for later.
Just put that in
their data.
Thanks,
we
Steve.
will follow up with you in writing. Just specifically put that question if you could, because I mean that we've had some really important quotes.
Sam, I have a story with that. Just quickly, if you don't mind. I remember we sit down in East London. Let me just give you this quickly, please, if you don't mind. We will sit down in East London at a meeting. We've invited a lady from similar to TfL from New York. What she said is, they've seen drivers coming to them crying. And we're wondering why these drivers are crying to us. We're the people who are supposed to be actually pushing them. So they went to Uber and said, give us the data. And Uber refused and refused. And then Uber took them to court. And what happened is, when they actually managed to get the data, and that the only way they got it is through the court, and they said to even at the court, Uber refused to comply to that, and they sent email to all their drivers saying, do not work for Uber. We've revoked their license immediately. So Uber next day, they come up here, and when they looked at it, it was shocking. From that point, they've decided basically to cap the vehicles in New York. So that's how bad it is.
Thanks very much. And now we're going to go on to CAPS and Assemblymember Tyrrell.
Yeah, so one quick question on the cap from me, because you've already touched upon why some of you believe a cap is required. My big concern with a cap is that the unintended consequence is that actually we find that it becomes more safe for particularly women trying to get home, because one good thing that all these app-based driver things have facilitators is the decimation of the young licensed minicab trade. So for those of you, with regards to the cap, how can you assure me that introducing a cap will not see the young licensed minicab trade return? We start with Alex and then work across the table.
Okay, so I think it's important to consider, that private hire drivers have provided a valuable mode of transport late at night for vulnerable people, along with various other valuable ways of transporting people from A to B. And I think that will be one of Uber's main points that they try and lobby TfL over and say, we need 108,000 drivers on the road in order to provide certain services. But we've 100% seen that there is an abundance of drivers, that there is no way that people are going to be struggling. If the pay is what it is, there will be a driver there within seconds because they are always that close. So the capping of drivers, as I said before, it cannot be looked at in a vacuum. That is not a silver bullet to sort out this issue. It needs to be coupled with the transparency, with the improvement of pay, with the introduction of actual holiday pay where drivers can take time off the road rather than up in their hours because it's coming out of their own pocket. But without opening a can of worms, I think that will be their core argument. And I think it's a flimsy argument because there will 100% be enough drivers around who will be willing to take that trip whatever time of day it is.
Okay, Steve?
I remember when there used to be blaggers outside nightclubs, pirates, some people call them, but ultimately that diminished for many reasons, but not least of all the signage that people could identify a private hire vehicle in London, and the fact that with the advent of so many apps, most people, I would say, would err on the side of safety. Because of the explosion in numbers, I don't think that's the issue. The reality is that where you start to cap numbers, obviously it then gets things to return back to a normal, natural level with regard to charging. LPHCA will argue that they need more and more drivers on the road for their operators, and the reason they need more and more drivers on the road for their operators is because ostensibly there are operators out there who are pretty crap, and they shouldn't be basically even with an operator's licence. The fact is that if you start to create a cap, it creates a better level of financial stability for those who are undertaking the work that they're doing. And there is obviously, I'm not going to get Keynesian in what I'm saying here, but ultimately, when you have a lower level, it means that people are actually paid appropriately, and this comes back to some of the expenses that have already been spoken about today. So I don't think it will take us back to earlier times. I think people are much too savvy, but what we do need is a better way of verifying the drivers and the safety elements, and TfL need to be centering on that.
Thomas, I said to you on the report, it talks about fatigue. And what's forcing the drivers to work 16 hours? It's because there are a lot of drivers there. Not only now the fares are so low, there's a big waiting time between fares. Well, you need to look at, probably you could do the same thing as New York and say, give us the data and see what's the occupancy rate there. Is it 90% occupancy? What is it exactly? So that affects the driver's earning. That vehicle at the end becomes a bullet in the street of London because the driver is tired. The drivers basically focus on running around where the fares are. You've got, congestions on the road. The earning of the driver. I'm there 16 hours and in between. Put it this way, 40% of my time I'm empty, or 45% of my time. And I mean, if after 10 a.m., probably it increases, becomes 60% of my time. So that tells you basically there's a lot of licensing there. And the other issue, just look at why actually today TfL having a problem basically renewing these licenses. They're all piling up at the same time.
Can I make a suggestion, if there's a way for the committee to do a road trip, we'll call it, out to the AVA at Heathrow and maybe hear drivers' stories directly? Because you know, from GMB's perspective, it's a place. You know, there's a place where we do surgeries frequently with drivers and hear the stories. And I think it would be of value for the committee to actually hear the stories directly, where you've got a substantive level of drivers sitting, and to hear that story yourselves.
Let us take that way and see what we can do. Thank you for that suggestion. And I am going to Assemblymember Russell.
Thank you, Chair, and just thank you, all of you, for everything you've said, because you have really given such a clear picture from the driver perspective, and I think that's really important as this committee puts its feedback back to TfL on the taxi and private hire action plan. So going beyond caps and thinking about cross-border hiring, and Hadi, you've raised things like fatigue, you've raised all the kind of safety issues, and it's not only about passenger safety, it's also about road danger type safety. If drivers are tired, they're kind of more likely to be involved in a collision. But the cross-border hiring issue, we heard from TfL that it is even more of an issue in their eyes than the issue of capping. And they are particularly worried about it because it prevents them from effective enforcement of licensing rules, and it means there are drivers driving within London who are potentially licensed in Wolverhampton or wherever it happens to be, and it means that the kind of regulation that TfL can provide isn't covering all the people who are working as private hire drivers in London. So the question is, what do you think the Mayor and the government should be doing to address cross-border hiring in London?
Can I jump in? So I think, linking it to the government is really important. I think one of the reasons people move around so much is because they're chasing money. And if they were earning enough locally, they wouldn't be having to travel so far. So a lot of these, there's huge intersects there, and I understand that these powers are outside of TfL's remit, and that's why this needs to go beyond. Because, I'm sure drivers wouldn't be travelling, commuting the distances in order to try and come to London and join the scrap for money here. I mean, it's always the grass is greener, and I'm sure they're bitterly disappointed when they arrive in London in any case. So I think that is key. The pay needs to be driven up, and then people won't be travelling.
But am I right that there are drivers who are based in London who are licensed in other places like Wolverhampton? Steve, you're nodding.
Yeah, the problem is this, and it's something that I kept going on and on and on about with TfL, about the excessive fees even for operators to operate in London. When you can go to Wolverhampton and get an operator's licence for as cheap as chips, and you can also get driver's licensed basically over a video link in effect, and everything's done by phone, and once in a blue moon they may send out an enforcement officer from Wolverhampton. You cannot expect there to be high standards because even with the best will in the world, whether it's Wolverhampton or anywhere else, they cannot be everywhere all seeing at all times. It's not to denigrate their licensing team. I'm sure they're smashing people, but in reality, when you can get your licence cheaper and you don't have to go through all the regulatory guidelines that you might have to in London, you're going to go where it's cheapest. Or up until recently, before the NR3S came in, where if you told one authority that you were wonderful and you then got fired from them and the next authority took you on, nobody was talking to each other. There's better engagement now to find out if a driver's been revoked or not. But that was the other reason for people travelling between authorities. It was lower levels of standards. And what we need nationally is a national standard. We need a national licence number to follow a driver, so if he wants to move from London and suddenly he wants to live in Stockport, he can take his national licence, it's portable, and that can be merged into whatever's existing in that locality. I know it will bring us on to devolution, but that's a different story. But where we're at with plans like Andy Burnham's in Manchester, that is the way we need to be going. And the reality is, whether we like it or not, you are having drivers coming into various areas from other licensing authorities, and it can't go on forever. And the problem is the cost of enforcement is substantial. And frankly, getting people to actually be out at 1, 2, 3 a.m. as enforcement officers is also problematic, I would imagine, as well. But getting from other authorities, such as Wolverhampton or Stockport or wherever else, is near on impossible. They're not going to come all the way down to London.
Caroline, the issue of the cross-border, it's actually something that the operators are exploiting the drivers. If you look at, for example, London, they have strict regulation when you actually license your private hire vehicle, where in other councils, they don't have that strict regulation. London, you have to meet, the vehicle has to be hybrid, and you can't just basically do any diesel and so on. So with the higher standard, high-end expensive vehicles, what we've seen is dramatically, specifically in London, that the operators basically bringing drivers from the other parts. For example, you could go to a big exhibition, you look at, and you would know by the London drivers, these majority of them will be electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles, and then you see the others, and you look at the plate number, you know this, it's not from London, you see basically it's a diesel vehicle and so on and whatever. So there is a problem there. And
are you saying that that this is linked with the way that the operators are exploiting drivers?
Absolutely.
Can you just set that out really plainly so that it...
There was a value once upon a time of being a London licensed driver, because you weren't paying ULEZ, you weren't paying any vehicle fees to come and work within London. And one of the things that then was a causal effect on drivers' incomes was the fact that they were being asked to theoretically pay a fee on a daily basis that then erodes their income. If they do one journey, that would more or less cover the fee, but then you're expectant on all of the other journeys. That's going to, if there's no value in that, if that's suddenly been taken away from you, then what's the point of being licensed in London under that auspice? Because there's no value in attracting people in. And that was the same with what they did with operators. They were charging so much that they were going to Three Rivers and all sorts of other Castle Point and other licensing authorities, that's Southend, near Southend, to get licensed as operators, because there was no value or it was just too costly to be licensed in London. There's been mention of the fees going up again. Well, unfortunately, when you've got all of the expense you've created around yourself, then fees have to go up. And the whole way the system works at the moment is incorrect. I believe there should be a small nominal charge on journeys that actually covers the cost of emissions, so that drivers aren't hit with it. It's paid for at source by the customer rather than the driver themselves, because it's obscene that you're asking somebody to take you somewhere on their dime, in effect, to make sure you feel good about yourself. And with the removal of all benefits after the end of the year with electric vehicles, that's going to be a further cost to drivers as well.
So,
Caroline, let me give you a quick...
I'm really...
Okay.
We're going to have to move on to the last question, really. I'm sorry, I know that we didn't quite finish that discussion. Can I ask you maybe to clarify what any follow-up might be with scrutiny? We can put it in writing. Would that be OK?
That would be fine, Chair.
I'm really sorry, but we do have one last question. So, Assembly Member Garrett.
Hello. It's been quite an interesting discussion, actually, about all of the problems. So I can see why you have a platform and you want to make all the points that you want to make. You may also want to make some points about the cost of charging electric vehicles, which is what I was going to ask about. Coming back to the action plan, which I suppose is our focus for the questions, do you think that the action plan does enough to address both the cost, which I think is a big issue, and also the availability, which obviously is another issue, of charging? I don't know if you want to start, Alex.
As I mentioned earlier, I feel that the way this originally started with Uber and other operators was that you were meant to get an increased fare, increased payment for if you're in a green vehicle. But nowadays, if you talk to drivers who have made that transition, they're seeing their pay level out, if not be less than people in, fuel-driven cars. So there's been a complete disincentivization of that. So I think, there's no reason for people to be making that transition. There's also, the rising cost of energy means that, the pay that you're getting, you're making £1 every 2 miles or whatever the calculation is, that it's just not there. I feel the infrastructure has somewhat moved on, but it's still not there. I mean, Addison Lee did a U-turn on their electric fleet because they just knew that the technology and the infrastructure was not there yet for private hire drivers to be operating, long journeys, like spending long amounts of time on the road for this. So I think, it seems pointless for drivers to be making this transition when they're just seeing their paying conditions continue to be eroded in these vehicles.
Yeah. A driver mentioned to me the other day, actually, that he wished he could just go back to his Prius rather than, I think it was a Volkswagen that he got that was electric and it was more expensive. Just to pick up what you said, you think it's likely that, I think on the figures we've got here, 53% of PHVs in London are electric. You think that's likely to stall or even go backwards? Is that what you're saying, because of the cost?
Yeah, I think definitely we're hearing of people changing back, people who were in these vehicles who've made the decision to go back. I mean, we're in WhatsApp groups where all day long there's these conversations and people are like, hand it back in, don't bother, get back in one of these other cars, which mean we're not going to be hitting green targets.
And is that cost or availability? You said it's more the cost than the availability now. Is that driving that? Okay.
Yeah, it's the cost.
It's not just the cost of vehicles. It's the cost of power, and we need to tell two stories here. We have night and day drivers doing shifts in London, and that's no different for London Taxi. The reality is, though, that if you've worked at night, you're having to pay a day rate to charge your vehicle. You don't get the benefit of those 7 or 8 pence off-peak rates. Or if you get to go and charge your vehicle, if you're lucky enough to find a high-speed charger that isn't gouging you at 86p per kilowatt hour, which will, in effect, work out more than a combustible fuel, you're basically contending with other users of charging points. I went to Leeds recently and played Hunt the charging point because half the charging points were either full or, unfortunately, as we've started to discover, people are stealing the cables for copper. They're chopping the cables off, and you'll find it's at epidemic levels now. But that's the other problem, finding charging points that are available and not being hogged for a predominant part of the day by somebody else.
Yeah.
The cost availability is improving per se, and anyone knows to use ZapMap. But as an example, in the AV8 Heathrow, not one charging point. Well, how crazy is that? TfL have put something in near Hatton Cross. There is the new point in the city, but you cannot stop halfway through a shift, lose an hour, which could be the most valuable time, and then expect it to really work. And I would say on this point, and it's not to denigrate the taxi trade in any way, shape or form, but they only now have the choice of a hybrid option vehicle. It isn't fully electric because the other operators have fallen by the wayside because of vehicle availability. But the reality is it seems incongruous to say private hire has to be at a certain level and taxi can go with what they've got because that's all they've got. So I think there has to be a step back. Under the previous Deputy Mayor, we did have the conversation about just taking a beat, at least on hybrid vehicles. And I think that may be potentially the way we need to be looking at this stage. But the cost of charging points is ridiculous. And I know Octopus are trying hard to change the way charging is looked at in this country. But we need to be doing more to find sustainable systems to charge with as well, solar and other.
Yeah, the figures we were given from the RAC, well, they published them. It's like 7p a mile or 7p a kilometre maybe, if you can charge at home. for petrol or diesel, it's like 15, 16p, and if you're charging on the street, it's like 24p.
Neil, I drive a
I was going to finish ahead of you. If you round off this section, I think we're out of time.
I drive actually electric vehicle. It's only cheap if you charge your home.
Yeah.
And majority of these guys do not have, the opportunity to charge your home. They either live in flats and so on. Our BAME officer basically got a electric vehicle, and now he's saying it's not worth it. His Prius is more cost-effective than this, because the electric vehicle, if you just park it, it drains out. If you park your hybrid car, it doesn't drain the fuel out. And Steve saying 56p a minute is not actually 56p a minute, it's actually 86p a minute.
86.
Yeah, it's only 56p a minute if you have a Tesla and you're charging at the Tesla point. And the other thing is, the availability is not there. We have to squeeze in with the members of the public in order to get our vehicles basically charged. What at the moment I hear from the drivers and myself is the cost that is actually driving them to go back to the electric vehicle. Because before it was cheap, but at the moment, because of the electric being so expensive, so it's even more expensive running that vehicle than actually petrol or diesel vehicle.
So just I'm conscious everyone's got a lot to say, and we need to finish off. So just on that point, then, it seems like there's a real stark difference between if you're a driver with an EV with a drive, you can charge at home overnight, very cheap, like 7p per mile, whereas if you're charging on the street on a rapid charger, it's more like 24p a mile. These are the RAC figures.
There's not 24p
per mile. This is when you take into account how many kilowatts it takes you to drive per mile. The point is, it's like 3 times as much. So that's a big factor, is it? The lack of availability of off-street parking and therefore charging off-street, versus if you get forced to park on street and therefore charge on street. Is that what you're flagging up?
Yeah, and also I'm flagging up the cost. You can do it if you have a driveway, but not every private hire drivers would have the opportunity to have a driveway. And a lot of them live in flats, and how are you going to be able to, I don't live in a driveway, but I managed to get a long cable, and I hope that there's no vehicles being parked in there. And I've spoken to my council several times to come and do something, nothing. So I had to put a plastic on the pavement. Maybe I need to take a picture and send it to you, so that it doesn't affect anyone. And that's the only way I can get it cheaper. But if I come on Saturday night, and I finished and I want to go back to work next day, the only way is for me to go to the nearest one will be Brent Cross and get charged 56 pence a minute, where if I do it at home, it's a lot cheaper.
Understood. Alec, you were going to be really quick.
Just a very brief point, because I think it was an oversight by us as well. But I mean, they're reintroducing the congestion charge for these, vehicle users. There are no exemptions around other areas, so it's further disincentivization of using these vehicles. So I think that's something that. Why are they now being charged congestion charges?
So what will happen is the congestion, this is going to end by December this year. So what will happen is we're going to see a lot of these people actually going back to whatever, because if they're not going to get the congestion free because they're driving electric vehicles, so what's the point of having this, and that's going to cost you even more?
Yeah, I think that's something to watch.
Yeah, obviously I'd alluded to that earlier, but I just want to come back to 2 things. What needs to be in place are some mitigations for drivers to actually get them on the road. Either a decent scheme that gives a contribution, either from the Mayoralty stroke TfL, a consideration of removal of VAT on electricity prices for all private hire and taxi, from a charging perspective, which will start to ease some of the burden. And I just want to take issue over this 7p or 24p business. The reality is that might be what it costs to drive the vehicle, but to put the vehicle on the road and to pay for the insurance, which can be in excess of 2k alone, it is substantially more. If you're talking about even a 30 grand car, a BYD or something like that, 35.
I'm just very conscious of time. So that was purely, this was figures from the RAC Charge Watch, I think it's called. They were looking purely at the fuel cost per mile. You're absolutely right. There's insurance, tyres, brakes, MOT, everything else. It's all
absolutely,
adds up.
and I think that the point I'm making is that for a driver, they don't get out and I'm absolved of all cost, especially with some of the really, really nasty lease-to-buy companies out there who will take a driver's vehicle off the back of them as soon as they blink if they've got an opportunity to profit off them.
Understood. Thank you,
Thanks
Chair.
very much. And that's the end of our questions. I mean, I'm sure we could actually go on all day, to be honest, but we will write to you with some specifics that we've raised today that we'd like to answer. And if anything else that you go away and think, well, we really should have raised X, Y and Z, then please do then put that into writing with us as well. Thank you very, very much for your time. We're now going to take a short break. I'm going to try and ask that to be a really short break, just 5 minutes. So if you could be back at 36 minutes past before we resume with our second panel. Thank you very much. Welcome back to today's Transport Committee meeting and our discussion on TfL's Taxi and Private Hire Action Plan. I'd now like to welcome our second panel of guests representing taxi organisations. Steve McNamara, General Secretary, Licensed Taxi Drivers Association. Welcome, Steve. Grant Davies, Chairman, London Cab Drivers Club. Trevor Merrills, General Secretary, the United Cabbies Group. And Peter Bond, Workplace Rep for Unite the Union. Thank you all for both being here and bearing with us at a slightly later start. So I'm going to start off with a general question, but we're going to come on to more specific areas. So if you could confine yourself to sort of the headlines in the first question, that would be hugely appreciated. We'll try and give you the opportunity to say what you need wherever we can. So firstly, Transport for London's Taxi and Private Hire Action Plan 2025 has received criticism from industry stakeholders, such as it's a missed opportunity and includes no real plans to address the challenges. What should the plan be including to address the key issues affecting taxi drivers in London? Who wants to kick off? Pete? Sorry, if you could, Mike, so if you press the button at the front, it'll go red, and now you're on.
Yeah, so just a general thing before we get into specifics. The main points for us at Unite the Union as taxi drivers: access to roads or lack of access to many roads, red routes and borough roads. That one, I was surprised to see taxi apps to be regulated, which the action plan puts down to a government action. I don't understand that at all. I don't know why. Personally, I've brought that up at virtually every meeting I go to, even if it's not about it. I bring that up as another subject. And obviously cross-border hiring, which is in there, but again it's down as a government action and not a TfL, TPH action. Whereas if you listen to Andy Burnham, I know it's in there, so Sadiq Khan supports it, I presume, working on this. But if you listen to Andy Burnham, he's going on about it all the time. We've met him many times. We need the Mayor to come out and speak like Andy Burnham does on cross-border hiring. Many other things, but that's my starting.
Thanks, that's a helpful up front. We want to go this way? I think we'll go Trevor next.
Yeah, thank you for giving us the opportunity to express our opinions, how underwhelming this inaction plan really is. Where is the differential between taxis and private hire? Because we're not the same. We're not the same, but somehow we have been lumped in together. You know, I have the honour of being the General Secretary of the UCG, and I'm sorry if I sound like I'm having a go at you, but that's just my comprehensive school education. I'm a boy off a working class boy off a council estate, and I can't change the way I am. Right? But so we're here today on behalf of my membership to actually speak some uncomfortable truths in a climate of placating lies. Because what happened to the previous action plan that TfL, some of you might well have been on the Transport Committee then, none of it was enacted. I recall the previous Transport Committee referring to TfL as woefully inadequate. I wouldn't even say they're that good. And that's being generous. As I touched on, I've only had a comprehensive school education. The best I can come up with, without using expletives, is this report is benign. And obviously I'll go into details, a bit more detail a bit later on, but I'll give my colleagues the opportunity to express their members' views.
Many thanks. Grant?
There we are, Mom. Thank you, Ellie, for today, the opportunity to speak in front of everyone. I get Trevor's frustration as a cab driver for 37 years. I feel like a minor under Thatcher. Since Uber come in 2012, TfL have laid back and done whatever they want to let Uber do. You know, it's there's about 16,000 of us now left in the mine, 107,000 and growing private hire drivers, and you've heard them before us talk about how hard it is as a private hire driver with the costs and the lack of everything, and that's what we're up against. And before I give it to Steve, I've got some issues here. The key issues that I think affect the black cab trade. It's market saturation of the private hire industry, the congestion that causes and the emissions that causes for Londoners, bearing in mind the Mayor said he didn't want a car-led recovery. Well, 107,000 and growing is a bit of a car-led recovery to me. Economic pressure on taxi drivers with the cost of the vehicle. Since 2018, we had to buy the EV cab. It's a lovely cab. But in November, December 2017, the price of a cab was 47 grand. January the 1st, you woke up and it was 67 grand. And at the same time, Uber was exploding on our streets and our work was declining, our cost was expanding. So I'm not an economist, but if you can look at a business plan where your costs are going up and your work's coming down, see how long that lasts. And that's where we are as a cab trade. We got these costs, the enforcement failures. TfL, I think at the last meeting, had a couple of hundred enforcement officers, not all working at the same time, obviously, multi-trained to work on the buses and the underground, yeah. And if you look at 107,000 private hire drivers and 17,000 of us, for them amount 120, 130,000 vehicles, we've got a couple of hundred compliance officers, so that ain't working. Enforcement failures and accessibility and inclusion. Just to wrap it up with the LTNs, you know, the whole point of taking a black cab in London for the old, the disabled, the families, general people, is I want you, sir, to take me from here, to take me over there. Now, for me to get the A to B sometimes, I have to go C, D, E, F, G and back. And what that does, that literally causes more pressure and congestion on other roads, and also puts our fares up. So it makes us less you know, attractive to the public. If they know they get a black cab home and it's 20 quid, or they can go on that American app firm and it's going to be 12 or 13, 9 times out of 10, everyone's money's tight at the moment, so they'll take the cheaper option. So our fares are being increased by these LTNs. And on that point, I'll hand over to my colleague.
Thanks very much. Steve.
Thank you. Good morning still? No, yeah, it's just still morning. Good morning. Yeah, you started off, Ellie, by saying that the action plan was described as a missed opportunity. And it certainly is a missed opportunity to safeguard the future of the taxi trade. What we've got in it, we've got lots of commitments to consult and to do this in the future. There's very little in the way of concrete actions, and the concrete actions that are included, some of which, if not handled correctly, could be very damaging to the future of the trade, the detail of which I think we'll go through as we go through the points.
Much appreciated. Thank you all for keeping your introductory remarks brief, and we'll get into some detail. Over to you, Assemblymember Russell.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming in. This is a question for Grant. You have previously stated that the 2025 action plan should have concrete actions, transparent timelines and measurable outcomes. In particular, you hang on, you said sorry, I should have got, don't worry, I'm going to abandon ship on that. Yeah, no, you said for that plan to gain the trust of London's black cab drivers, it must go beyond reiterating previous commitments. So it's got to do more than the 2016 plan did. So what do you think that should look like?
I mean, a bit like what Steve just said, actually. We've always been promised a lot, but nothing's ever materialised. I think it was 2016 and even up to 2019, they talked about having an enhanced driving test for all applicants, because it's all right for us to just have a driving licence, but if I'm taking your lovely old mum to the hospital or your kids, I should be a professional driver. But at the moment, there's no professional standard that's given by TfL. And in 2019, they asked for a consultation on whether or not enhanced driving tests should come about. And it was overwhelmingly supported then that, yes, everyone believes that black cabs, when you finish the knowledge, and private hire drivers, when we're getting a licence, should be enhanced driving test level. Professional driver to take your mum and your daughter home. That's never happened. And now I see it again. Is in the plan again, talking about, oh, what about driving tests? They sound good. Well, they do sound good, we've had a consultation on it. Everyone said do it. But guess what, TfL? You haven't done it. 7 years later, you haven't done it. So it's almost like being a cab driver sitting here in front of you today with the other heads of the other trade groups. It's like deja vu. I'm hearing TfL tell me what they're going to do, but there's a big difference in talking and doing. And unfortunately, when it comes to doing, TfL are, I quote Trevor, woeful. There's no other word. They're woeful.
And interestingly, TfL have a very clear target for Vision Zero, which is to reduce the number of people killed and seriously injured on the road. Having drivers trained to a more professional standard is something very simple that would actually potentially help them to meet their Vision Zero targets. And obviously, you know, we all know black cab drivers have a reputation for being some of the best drivers on the roads in London, but actually, you know, kind of sort of embedding that professional standard of driving across both taxi and private hire is potentially something that we could be pushing the TfL to include in their Vision Zero update plan.
Well, I just think, right, that instead of raising standards for safety, TfL seem to be just interested in a race to the bottom. You've heard the private hire today talk about it, and we're here today as taxi, you know, drivers and people representing our members saying, you know, TfL seem to have no interest in raising standards for the public. They're more interested in just facilitating a race to the bottom. Everyone all together chasing the next fare, whether that be taxi or private hire. It's like the Wild West out there.
And it seems that the problem of companies like Uber that are obviously clearly exploiting the private hire drivers, but that exploitation is actually sort of coming over to cover the black cab trade as well.
And you would think, right, private hire different to us, but when you have the oversaturation of the marketplace, where you have over 107,000 people driving the car in London, waiting for that phone to go off. Every car, I'm in traffic working, every car, it seems, in front of me, next to me, behind me, has got a Randall. And TfL don't seem to care because guess what? It's the moolah. They get the licence fees, right? So they're thinking, nothing to see here, Governor. He wants a licence. How much? That's lovely, that's another one. But they've got no concern about where it leaves the drivers. Ever since Uber come in, they've had the whip hand. They've told TfL to jump, and TfL have said, how ride you want us to jump.
Yeah, no, we're hearing that loud and clear.
Good.
I should be handing back to the chair, but just very briefly, does anyone else want to come in on that question? So if we go for Peter and then Stephen, if we can keep it tight, because I know we're having to try and keep to time.
OK, I just want to reiterate the point. Because of our age, we all had extra driving lessons after we did the knowledge. You don't do that till after. You used to only do that after, and you had to pass the strict driving test. There was a place in Balls Pond Road where we had to do reversing and all that, but we had to drive on the road. Another driving test. That's a great point. And what I want to say is that many meetings we've all been to, for safety and security, is what we're always being told by TfL, the government, DfT, safety and security. But when we bring it up, bring back the driving test, regulate the taxi apps for safety, don't offer one job to 25 drivers because they're all rushing to touch the button, nothing happens. We've all been saying it for years. I've brought up that subject many times. I just wanted to reiterate that point about the driving test.
Thank you.
It's so important.
Heard loud and clear. Steve.
Yeah, quickly, it's under action point 4 in the action plan, where they're talking about consulting on the enhanced driving test yet again, even though they've already consulted on it once, and they're not talking about consulting on it until 26, 27, quite when that means they would actually implement the results of the consultation. Bearing in mind that the last consultation was kept secret, and the only way we could get the response was to FOI it 3 years after it was done, and they had to share the response to the consultation. The history of it is actually quite important. So what happened is, prior to TfL, the test was carried out by the Old Carriage Office, by the Met Police. On the introduction of TfL, the driving test was given to the DSA, the Driving Standards Agency, and they used to do it. The DSA announced that they were going to stop doing it in 2018 because they haven't got the staff, and it was just generally, you'll be aware, you can't get a driving test normally, so they said they've got to stop doing it. And all it was a matter of was TfL sourcing another supplier, procuring a new supplier. That sort of lingered on for 2 or 3 years. Then they did the consultation, and now they're going to consult on it again, 26, 27. This is something that could have been in the action plan that's already been consulted on. Could have been a concrete proposal to secure a provider, bring it in by January next year, and they haven't done it. And the question needs to be, you know, why? I go to these Vision Zero meetings, as you know. I raise it constantly at Vision Zero, and I don't think I'm particularly welcome there, to be honest with you, because the narrative doesn't fit. Instead of sitting around talking about what we could do at Vision Zero, this is something you could do tomorrow morning, and it's never done. And again, we're consulting on it in 26, 27.
Thank you. That's heard loud and clear, and I'll certainly be pushing for us to try and get it into the into our response.
If I could just
do you want to come in?
put my little 2 pence in, totally agree with my 3 colleagues here. But the issue is every taxi driver, since TfL stopped doing the enhanced driving test, as a condition, new taxi drivers have a condition on their licence that when they will have to at some stage do this enhanced driving test. And the most important people are Londoners, are your family, your loved ones. And we're actually trusted, especially taxis, a trusted form of public transport, trusted to transport your loved ones. The least, for hire and reward, the least you should expect is that drivers and the vehicles come up to scratch. And I know we're going to touch on that later on, but when people are getting licensed, who live in London but are getting licensed outside of London to then come and work in London, and you can't have any TfL say we can't look at the vehicle and that, this is people's safety, and that is what TfL's remit is. They're not here to facilitate businesses. They're not here actually to facilitate the London taxi trade. They inherited us. They go round calling themselves, self-proclaimed, the world-class regulator. Well, let me just... The reason they're a proclaimed world-class regulator is because they represent London, which is a first world-class city. And they inherited the most famous, recognised, best taxi service in the world. That's why they're viewed as world class. For their inactions, I wouldn't, to be totally honest with you, I wouldn't let them put the kettle on for me. Unfortunately, I've got to be licensed by them as part of conditions, but they are awful. And it's no good keep kicking this can down the road to now 2026, 2027 before we start talking about people's driving standards. When people are transporting and getting paid for doing that, the least you can expect. And it's not just taxis and private hire, though. Look at the standard of bus driving. Look at the accidents that are happening in buses. All under TfL's remit, all under their watch. As someone once said, it might have been me, I don't know, under their watchful blindness.
Thank you. Hearing this loud and clear, I'm trying to hand back to the chair.
Can I just say?
If it's very,
just quickly,
very
it's a two-liner.
Okay, how long are the lines?
Okay, yeah, God. Is it? We're with Transport for London, and all what we're talking about, public safety, right? It used to be the Public Carriage Office, and it was called the Public Carriage Office for one reason: the safety of the public. That's it.
Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thanks very much. I'm now handing over to Assembly Member Prince.
Sorry, nobody wanted to hear me anyway, so... Steve, I'll start with you. You said actually just a moment that you described the plan as a missed opportunity. Can I assure you that we asked to be consulted before the plan was published, and we were refused that right. They wouldn't allow us to have any input before the publication of the plan, which I think is damning in itself. But I want to talk about the knowledge. And what amendments do you think TfL should make to the knowledge to attract more applicants?
Yeah, this is a thorny subject where different people have different opinions on it. But the reality is that the knowledge could be brought into the 21st century a lot more than it has been. Some of the changes that TfL have made recently are a welcome improvement. So what used to happen previously, the points that you're asked, which are the locations of interest, so they ask you where, you know, the Albert Hall is or some hotel. They've now got a set list of those. There's a basket, and they can only ask, the examiners can only ask that. So that's an improvement. What they've also done, they've amended the times that you can apply to get an appearance, to get a test, and that's been shortened. So that is actually beginning to have a bit of an impact, and it is bringing the time down. So that is a genuine positive improvement. But they could certainly go further without reducing what's known as the gold standard. So what we need to do, we need to improve the testing system and retain the gold standard. Now, I've always thought that for some time the early stages of the test could be used where the problem we've got is a younger generation of people. If you was to give them a map book, if you was to stop someone in the canteen there and say there's an A to Z of London, they've probably never even seen one. You know, they think it belongs in a museum. And a lot of the knowledge of London is still based around an A to Z. A lot of people use iPads and stuff, but it's still based around the A to Z principle, the old map principle. And the way that it could be made more attractive to a younger demographic, more along the lines of the sort of thing that they're used to doing, is to, number one, the knowledge needs to be made more modular. So what happens at the moment, look, if you're doing a history A level or a degree in history, nobody says to you, oh, you're doing sort of modern history, 20th century history, you know, start from Queen Victoria's death in 1901 and go through to the end of the Cold War. Off you go. Come back in 3 years and we'll ask you questions on it. That's not how it's done. You do it in modules. So you'll do, you know, Germany before the First World War, post First World War, Versailles, and all of that stuff. And you do it modularly. The knowledge isn't done like that at the moment, unfortunately. They give you a book and off you go, come back when you've learnt all the runs and you think you've learnt it all. So I've always thought that it should be tested in a modular manner. So you'd learn the first 50 routes, you'd be tested, the second 50 routes, you'd be tested, and then at the end, obviously, you'd keep repeating the testing. I've always thought that was a way that a younger demographic are used to learning things, and that's the way it should be done. I also think that we could use technology a lot more. A lot of the knowledge schools now have got these incredible apps. I mean, apps are very cheap to make now. So you learn it on the app and you can see what runs you've done and what routes you've done. And you could be tested in the same way. So when you've done the first 50 runs, the knowledge examiners can see what you've done on the app. They know what runs you've done because there they are. You could do it via, you know, remote Zoom or Google Meets or whatever it is, and you could test the first 50 runs on that. Now, the argument against it is, oh, somebody could cheat. Well, yeah, you could cheat. And the problem is, when you then get to the second stage of the knowledge, where you're then back in a room with the guy or woman, as you are at the moment, all the cheating in the world is going to become pretty damn obvious that you didn't learn anything because you're not going to know the questions face to face. But what it would do, it would give people the experience of being tested. It would be testing them in a way to which they're used to learning by using computers and apps and technology, and get away from the old map book. So I certainly think that could be brought in. The other thing that needs reviewing is the way that the initial information is disseminated. You get given a book. It needs to be modular. It needs to be broken down. It needs to be tested, broken down, and the testing methods need to be modernised and reviewed.
Thank you. I'll just finish with Steve, and then I'll ask the others to. So. We know that
Member Prince, can I pause you just for 1 second?
Of course you can.
So I can welcome, who I think are Year 5 students from Richard Albram Primary School in Dagenham? Yeah, welcome. We're talking to a panel of taxi drivers today. I'm sure you're all familiar with that and hearing about what it's like for taxi drivers on the roads at the moment. So welcome.
You're welcome.
You didn't realise there was going to be the kids as well, did you? So back to you, Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you very much. I'm more than happy to be interrupted for that. The action plan does state that attracting drivers is one of their 4 key objectives. We've also seen 4,000 fewer taxi drivers since 4 years ago, and that's been throughout the period of the mayor's mayoralty. And I've seen that there's now 84% fewer people applying for the knowledge in the last 25 years. So do you think that modularisation will help to counter all these points of fewer people and so on?
Yeah, there's a plethora of reasons why taxi driver numbers are down, and the knowledge isn't one of them. We'll come on to most of them. You know, the cost of the vehicle, the pandemic, the requirement to be ZEC. All of these things have come together in a sort of almost perfect storm, if you want, and it was largely compounded by the pandemic because of the period when it happened. But specifically on the knowledge. The numbers on the knowledge are up. They're up from a very low base, it has to be said, but they are going the right way. And what we are seeing as a result of the changes that have been brought in, and as I said, they're not enough, but it's a good start. What we have seen is a number of people now beginning the time the knowledge is... The thing that I've never understood is when you look at history, back in the 1970s, the knowledge took an average of 15, 16 months. In the 1980s, it was up to 18 months and towards 2 years, and then all of a sudden it was up to 4 years. Now, London hasn't changed. It's got a bit bigger with Canary Wharf and things, but generally speaking, London hasn't changed. So why has the time taken to do the knowledge gone from 18 months to 4 years? Either younger people are stupid, and I don't think they are. I really don't think that's the case.
Careful of the audience.
Yeah, sorry.
Fingers in your ears, kids.
And I really don't think that's the case. And so the only thing can be is the way that it's tested and what's happened. And I think there's been a recognition of that at TfL, that the process did become more lengthy than it needed to be. And these recent changes have gone some way to that. If and there's a positive. I mean, just to give you a positive, they had a young gentleman got his badge the other week. He got it when he was 20. So he couldn't drive a cab. You can't drive a cab until you're 21. So he had to sit around for 4 months waiting for his 21st birthday when he could pop up and get his badge, which is great. And we've also seen regularly now people who are doing the knowledge in less than 2 years. But that is not the average. These are the really clever, the people who are doing it full-time and smart. The testing... By bringing in the modular testing, by bringing it into the 21st century, we can bring the average down to 2 years. And the key point here, I have to say at all points, is and maintain the gold standard. It's absolutely essential that we maintain a gold standard. And people who will tell you, do you need the knowledge? It's a question I get asked all the time. In the age of Waze and Google Maps, do you need the knowledge? And the simple answer to that is yes, you do, because you'll be stunned at the number of people who don't actually know where they're going or don't even know where they live. And what will happen is for example, you'll be stuck at Piccadilly Circus. If you never had the knowledge and we were relying on Waze or Google Maps, I'm stuck at Piccadilly Circus, I'm facing it, someone runs up, jumps into the cab and says, Phillimore Gardens. Well, is it Philly with an F? Is it PH? How do I say? And now the lights have changed and half of London is hooting behind me. And I've got to do something. Now, if I do a U-turn, I've gone the right way. But if I take one of the other 3 routes, I've gone the wrong way, and it's going to take me 20 minutes to get back to where I am. And that is why you need the knowledge. It's that instant recognition, the ability to plan routes, and the number of taxi drivers you'll see driving around who have got Waze and Google Maps running, not to tell them where they're going. They know where they're going. Half the time they're playing a game at beating the time on it. Because it's a game that cab drivers play. When you put it on the Waze, it said it's going to take you 13 minutes or 15 minutes. And they play a game with themselves to try and get it down to 10 or 11 minutes. And they take great pride in beating it regularly, because Waze is great if you don't know where you're going. But the moment you know where you're going, it is absolutely no alternative to the knowledge of London. And all we need to do with the knowledge of London is retain the gold standard, retain what we're world famous for, but modernise the testing method.
Thank you. Anybody else like to make a comment? Peter? Sorry.
I think Peter's ceded the floor to me. Thank you. Yeah, look, the knowledge has been a requirement for us since 1865. Now, all of you are career politicians. Why do you think the knowledge is suffering? It's got nothing to do with module. I hear what Steve says, but we're not facing up to the reality. because you've got to want to do the knowledge, and there's got to be a tangible reward at the end of it. And that is not there, because you earn your badge doing the knowledge. Why would you do, whether it's 18 months, 6 months, if it's 6 weeks, why would you do that when you can buy and work exactly the same in the private hire market? TfL have allowed this to happen. TfL, no one else, because we do the knowledge for one reason and one reason only, because we're publicly hired. Not because we want to show you we're more intelligent than the latest app. My daughter, you know, I'm a parent and proud parent to a daughter. First one in my family went to university. She managed to be able to read a book, so I think they can read. I'm not saying that the knowledge doesn't need to be updated, because it obviously does. But what is the reward? We've got members in the UCG. We take on knowledge membership. He's waited 9 months to get an answer whether he can go on the knowledge or not. So, and we know the numbers are poor, so why is it taking 9 months for them to turn and say, yes, you can proceed onto the knowledge? That's not down to poor, that's just down to inefficiency. But what is the attraction? What are the viable benefits at this present time for doing the knowledge? Because it seems to me, and I said at the beginning when I'd done my opening address, there's got to be a differential. But somehow we're being lumped in as if private hire and taxis are one and the same thing, and they're not. The clue's in the title. Private hire is exactly that, a private booking. They are exactly the same as all-day, everyday common traffic. Taxis are not. Taxis and I see these lovely, the future, the generations, the children there. Now, the taxi trade goes back to 1654. It's got a fantastic history, a fantastic heritage, and what it was always been an aspirational career, can allow people like myself and others who might not have had the greatest start in life to be able to give yourself and your children a better life. So I look at them kids there, year 5, and it's on us to make sure that we leave them a taxi trade to inherit if they wish to pursue that. Because that's what the knowledge is. You've got to want to do it. It's got to be a vocation. It's it's the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. I'm not going to say that I wished for it, because I didn't. I struggled. But it's no surprise. I'm a prime example of the British education system. But I struggled, but I got there. Perseverance. No one gave it to me. But for that, I entered a covenant. And that covenant was I would do the knowledge of London that gave me the right to apply for hire, because I'm publicly hired. The vehicle that I drive is part of that covenant, and the final part is applying for hire. Now, TfL have allowed private hire to work in our market, because they're immediate. Whether it use technology, TfL say, and they do say, oh, but technology's blurred the lines. Well, they're the regulator. Their responsibility was not to allow the lines to become blurred. But what they've done is they've facilitated big business. And that's to the detriment of the London taxi trade. And then they wonder why no one's wanting to do the knowledge. Well, why would you? Human nature. Do you want to do 4 years of your life studying, going out 7 days a week in all weather, learning all these points or you can pay us £300 now and you can go and do that in 6 weeks' time? That's the reality. And until you address that, then nothing. You can make the knowledge a week. It's not going to be attractive, is it? You've got to address what is the problem. Why are we sitting here talking about taxi numbers so low? Why has private hire all of a sudden become such an attractive job that since 2012 its numbers have gone from the region of 50-odd thousand to over 100,000? What's made it become so attractive? And why is taxi driving now so not attractive? Well, the answer is there, isn't it? Because they're working in our market. They're working in the immediate market, a market that, and we were promised, the taxi trade was, politicians went to great lengths in the 1998 Act to turn and say that this would not happen. TfL have said if you allow private hire to apply for hire, you will make the investment in the knowledge redundant. Their own words. TfL, they went and got this consultancy firm, Mott MacDonald. And Mott MacDonald turned and said, if you allow this to continue, what Private Eye are doing with the technology, the damage this is going to do to the taxi trade is immeasurable. And yet TfL turn around and say, oh, it's a bit of a blur and we're waiting for Parliament. What lobbying were they doing? They could have put in secondary legislation. They chose not to. Their role, as we touched on, is to protect the public. That's their role. That should be not to worry about big business. It's not their remit. They are custodians of the two-tier system. But I'm sure you should agree with me because the evidence is plain. If I can see it, you must certainly see it. TfL, through their policies, are heading towards a regulated one tier. And we, as a publicly hired service, should not be in competition with the free market because the things that are put in place for a reason, and all that reason is for the general public. Why do you think we go back to 1654? There was the equivalent of private eye around then, but yet politicians in 1654 said that what we must do is we must safeguard the public. We set the fares, we set the tests. It all goes back to, as I said, and I will end with this because I know others want to touch on it, but the author of this inaction plan, Christina Calderaro, that's her name, she's the author of it. She's been on record because in 2015, the European Courts of Justice, they said this: it follows that black cabs and minicabs are in factual and legal situations which are sufficiently distinct to permit the view that they are not comparable. So, ergo, we do not work the same, we do not have the same needs. She has used that on 2 legal cases against private hire. She has used that exact terminology, and yet she's been commissioned to do this report, and she hasn't put no differentials in there. And it's just paying lip service to us. And it's an absolute betrayal, not just on me, because I'm an old man, I'll see my time out. It's a betrayal on them kids up there, and their heritage and their futures.
Thank you. Peter, and then I'll come to you.
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat most of what has been said. I agree with almost all of it. The modular system, yes, but face-to-face has to be the key. That's the way you meet people, you get to know whether they can be cab drivers. And it is a vocation. Taxi driving, do the knowledge, spend a lot of time, spend a lot of effort. It's a vocation. And what Steve said about 20 taxi drivers similar to this in Trafalgar Square being asked immediately to go somewhere, 99% of the time they know where to go and they just go. You couldn't do that with the sat-nav. And if you follow the sat-nav, as has been said, it costs the passengers twice as much money. Maybe not twice as much, 1.5 times as much money, because the sat-nav does not go the way we go. This has to be an attractive profession for people to want to do the knowledge. And the cost and the earnings are part of that. It is a great job for women. Unfortunately, these young people have just left, and I was going to say there's a lot of them that could do it in the future, and hopefully some of their parents are taxi drivers or are doing the knowledge. Sadly, I don't think many of them will be, because there's not enough people doing the knowledge. But it has to be attractive. It's not attractive at the moment because of the costs and what we hear about earnings. And what I don't understand is if 20, 30 years ago, it was taking sometimes 18 months, sometimes 2 years, you were just as good then as we were in the 90s, 80s and 90s when we passed, and just as good now when you finished. Why is it taking so long now? It wasn't taking that long then, but they were just as good when they finished, so that must be the system. It cannot be that people are more stupid, because if anything, they're more intelligent now than they were when I was 25 and I did it. So why did it take less then than it does now? It must be the system, and that's what's got to be looked at. in my opinion. Thank you.
Hello, Keith. I'll keep it very brief because we've had some speeches already. Yeah, for the knowledge, I'm from a council estate in Brixton, 6 kids. For me, the knowledge was like doing a degree. You know, the nearest I ever got to a sort of something like a degree, and like Trevor intimated, it was so hard. And when I got my badge, it's almost like winning an Olympic gold medal, right? Because you think, wow, I've done this. And the self-esteem, and in working class circles, people used to go up to me mum and dad at wedding receptions and say, here, your Grant's got a cab driver now. You know, it was really great. I mean, in working class circles, being a cabbie, it's like being a bank manager or something, you know. But anyway, I digress. I think what Trevor said is quite important about the 2-tier system. And years ago, when we as taxi drivers paid our licence fee, part of that would be for the knowledge, right? We was the only industry that used to pay for the competition to come through the door. People think, how bad's that? But we done it because that's the whole point of the cab trade, and longevity, like Trevor said, being part of London's history, yeah, and the fabric of London. So we would pay for the next set of cab drivers to get changed. Now, I think it's about £600 if you want to do the knowledge, which is a sort of bit of a barrier to entry. If you're unemployed or got a bit of a dead-end job and you think, I might do the knowledge like my uncle or someone, right? Straight away they say, yeah, it's £600. You think, oh, I ain't got that. I'll save it up. But then it probably never happens that you actually save £600 up or whatever to join. So that's that point. The second point that's been touched on is if you want to become a green badge driver, you do the knowledge of London. If you want to be a yellow badge driver in the suburbs, you do the suburban knowledge, right? Like a ring donut. So anywhere you want to work as a taxi driver, you have to learn it, get tested on it, and then get your badge. If you're a private hire driver, right, bearing in mind, if you're a suburban driver, you can't work in London, right, because you've all got your own sectors or the green badge. If you're a private hire driver, like Trevor said, and it's £300, you get your licence, you can work absolutely anywhere. Suburbs, inner London, the door is open to you. And this is about... There's no meaningful regulation about treating the private hire like a different industry to us. And that is the point. It might suit TfL to amalgamate us and just have one bit of headed paper, taxi and private hire, right? Suits them, don't suit us. And to be honest, that's the crux of it. They've treated us like the one organisation, and we're not the same trades, yeah? And to be honest... That's the problem, Keith. We're not treated any different. It's a free-for-all, like I've said before. And I think there's senior management at TfL within TPH that need to look in the mirror, because I think we've been managed. We've been gaslighted over a decade now, and I feel we're being managed into a decline. That's how I feel.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. Just before we move on, I can keep looking over there for Assembly Member Curry. Can I just say one thing as well? Just to say, because we've got some really chunky subjects coming up, and absolutely heard what you said about private hire, and obviously we've taken evidence about regulation of private hire this morning from private hire organisations as well. But I think we probably need to try and focus on, but not to say it's not important, and we have taken that and we've heard you, but I just want to give you the opportunity to talk about those subjects, if that's all right.
Chair, I'll be quick question on the knowledge, and then to my next question on 13.
You can indeed.
Okay. Steve, I just wanted to come to you about the knowledge, because you and I have had talk about the kind of international respect that the knowledge has had, and actually attracting drivers to the taxi trade. Now, you've mentioned an interest in the Somali community, for example, that have been really attracted to the taxi trade. And I think that aspect hasn't really been discussed enough, the fact that the knowledge it highlights the profession of the taxi trade, but also the international respect that you have that are attracting people to want to work in this country and become a taxi driver.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting aspect. Unfortunately, the 4 of us sitting here today all look the same. But we are not now the representative face of the modern taxi driver as London changes. When I first doing this, everybody looked like me. That's not the case now. If you go to a knowledge, and actually I would really suggest to all of you that you take an invite up from TfL to go and sit in on a knowledge exam. If some of you have done it, and if not, they're at Stratford, they'll welcome you down there and you can go and see what actually goes on. And what you'll see when you go there is an absolute cross-section of London as it stands today. Whatever the demographics of London are, whatever percentage of people and religions and all different bits, you will see that cross-demographic of people on the knowledge. The only bit where we're still underrepresented on the knowledge, but less so now, it's increasing, is women. There's more and more women doing the knowledge, but we actually run a women's class, a knowledge at our building, and that's getting more and more women coming to it. So, but that's the only bit where we're underrepresenting. But as far as people from all over the world, different religions and nationalities, we're really represented. I got invited to the Somcab dinner last year, and you're all looking at me thinking, what's Somcab? Well, Somcab is a Somalian Cab Drivers Association, and they have a dinner once a year, and I got invited to it last year. And the really interesting bit is I was the only white guy in the room, and I was the only non-Somalian in the room, and all of them guys in that room, to do the knowledge is not easy, but to come halfway around the world to a country where you don't speak a word of the language, to not only learn the language and then to learn one of the most complicated cities in the world, far better than anybody in this room does, well, perhaps with the exception, but, to actually learn their way around London is an achievement that you can't, and in their community, as Grant was saying about what it used to be like, the knowledge has always been a thing for immigrants. It always has. Going back to when I first started driving a cab, most of the an awful lot of cab drivers were Jewish, post-war refugees that had come here. They'd started off in the rag trade or whatever they did, and they did the knowledge and they were driving cabs. Shortly after I did it, we had a lot of young West Indian guys doing it, second generation West Indians, and we still have a lot of those guys doing the knowledge. It tends to be a family thing with them. And what we're seeing now, as immigration patterns change, we're seeing a lot of Somalians, we're seeing a lot of Asians, and a lot of North Africans doing it. And I don't think there's any better way. One of the criticisms that you'll see all the time, and all the debates about immigration and all the stuff that goes on, and I'm not well above my pay grade, but all of the things that go on there, people talk about assimilation and how people, and the Prime Minister last week made a speech about learning English. These people who come to London do the knowledge and become cab drivers in London. That is the absolute definition of assimilating into coming here and becoming cab drivers. And that is completely under-recognised by everyone. To be fair to the Mayor, he did actually go down to the knowledge school and see what's going, the knowledge exam, and see what's going on. And I think he recognises it. And certainly his deputy mayors I've spoken to have all been there and they recognise it. And as I say, I would invite all the Assembly members to go. And what you'll see is exactly what's happening. So now what we need to do, we need to ensure that the standard is upheld so that those people come in here now, many of whom were previously private hire drivers, by the way. An awful lot of people doing the knowledge now are ex-private hire drivers, and the reason they choose to do the knowledge is because they want to upgrade, if you like. They want to become the creme de la creme of, and it really is incredible to see what's happening. Not enough recognition is given to it, and that's one of the reasons, as London changes and the demographics of London change, as everything always changes, it's really good to see it. And I'll tell you what, when I went to that dinner, the really strange bit about it is if you closed your eyes, I could have been in the cab shelter in the 1980s, listening to a load of cab drivers who looked like me. Now I was listening to a load of cab drivers who didn't look like me, but they all had the same issues and they was all moaning about the same stuff, most of which is not being dealt with here, by the way.
Steve, thank you so much for bringing that aspect of the discussion into this, because we're definitely an island of friends, aren't we, when you look around London. I wanted to talk to you also about the cost of purchasing and operating a taxi. What support would you like to see TfL and the government for taxi drivers regarding the cost of purchasing and operating a taxi?
Right, so there's a couple of key issues which are covered in the action plan. TfL are talking about lobbying the government for the reduction of VAT because it's a disability accessible vehicle. That is something that absolutely should be done, and I know for a fact that Seb has written to the Treasury. It's something that needs to be pushed further, because if you can reduce the VAT on the vehicle, that will be a long way towards it. The other thing, which was incidentally raised by Assembly members who were here, many of you raised it with me, is access to the Green Finance Fund that TfL run. The issue with that, and we've looked into it extensively and still are looking into it, and it's really got legs, this is a real possible runner. The problem with it is it needs to be a regular body, a regulated body that takes on the fund. So TfL could do it, and TfL have done it in the past. Local authority could do it, but the problem with local authority is they have borrowing ceilings, and so they don't really want to take on more debt that's not for them because it affects their borrowing ceilings. We've been in talks with the Energy Savings Trust, and we're very shortly going to be presenting a proposition to TfL in conjunction with the Energy Savings Trust, whereby the Green Finance Fund could be used to refinance these quite expensive vehicles, very expensive vehicles that we drive now, to enable drivers to buy them. The big problem at the moment is when we first had the vehicle in 2018, they were at 56 grand, interest rates were low, we had a scrappage scheme, we had grants to buy, to get plug-in chargers fitted at home, and on-street charging was very cheap. It was 25, 26p a kilowatt. Fast forward 8 years, the cost of the vehicles now, I think the cheapest one's just about 70 grand, but by the time you finance it, you're looking at probably 100 grand with interest rates as they are. That's the big killer. There's no scrappage scheme anymore. The grants to charging points has gone. There used to be a thing called the plug-in taxi grant that was funded by OZEV. That was £7,500 a few years ago. Last year it went down to £6,000, and this year it's just been reduced to £4,000. And OZEF have told us it's absolutely no way it's going to be renewed yet next year. It's a lost cause. Don't even bother chasing it. And unfortunately, in the Mayor's action plan, someone has decided that they will continue chasing this, and it's just that's just wasted energy. What they should be doing is working with us with the Green Finance Fund. I've met on numerous occasions now the new Deputy Mayor for Climate, Metty Coburn, who's going to be in charge of the Green Finance Fund, who is in charge of it, and he is very keen. He's actually, quite, keen is the word. He's very keen to bring it in. He wants to work with us. He wants to do it, and I actually think with his backing we can do it, and with the backing of the Assembly pushing for it as well. I actually think this is something that really could have legs, that could solve many of the problems that you're hearing about here today and elsewhere, certainly as far as the finance and the cost of the vehicle goes, that could be used along the lines of the taxi fund that's currently running in Scotland, the I can't remember what it's called, but the taxi purchase fund that the Scottish Government are funding. We could do that using the Green Finance Fund. It would be better to do it through TfL, as TfL being the loan provider, because they can charge zero interest. If it's done by the Energy Savings Trust, they have to charge a lower rate of interest, so this will be. But the good thing about it is, because the money coming back, so when the Green Finance Fund's set up, they lend the money out, and as you're paying the money back for the cab, that money comes back in and can go out again to finance more vehicles. It really is. I don't know which. Sorry, I can't remember which of you suggested it first, but whoever it was, everyone's putting. Well, he's pointing at Neil. I don't know, but whoever did it first, it genuinely was an eye-opener for us, and I can't believe we didn't think of it beforehand ourselves. But we're really keen for that. We'll be coming back to you shortly. We'll make sure that we share with you the Energy Savings Trust plan that we're looking at putting forward. But if that doesn't come to fruition, or there's reasons that it can't, because obviously the EST are going to want money to run it and all of that, you would be crucial in putting pressure on TfL to get them to run it. They can do it. They've done it before with other things. They've got the money. It would be fantastic if TfL run it. It'd be a really positive thing. And you don't hear a lot of positive. You certainly haven't heard a lot of positivity here today. But this would be something that really could be transformative for the taxi trade. And whilst we're on the subject of the vehicles, I'm not quite sure where we're coming to. I heard Steve Garlick earlier when he was talking about vehicles and EV vehicles. He referred to the vehicle we had as a hybrid. Technically, on the logbook, on the V5, it is a hybrid. It is not really a hybrid. It's what's called a range-extended electric vehicle. Now, the difference between what we drive and the hybrid vehicle that the private hire trade and members of the public drive is a hybrid vehicle. It can run on batteries, and when the batteries are not being used, it runs on an engine. So it's got an engine, it's got a gearbox, it's got a drive, and it drives on the engine. Our vehicle does not work like that. Our vehicle has got a small generator. So if you think along the lines of the generators you see at market stalls, you know, when they run it, that is what it is. And when the battery in the vehicle is depleted, the generator, you can start the generator. It does not drive the vehicle. It generates the electricity which goes through the motor which drives the vehicle. And the benefit of that is worst case scenario for a TXE running on the generator is 13 grams of CO2 a kilometre, 13. So that's worst case scenario. Whereas the diesels we used to drive used to put out 240, 250 grams of CO2. So when people talk about hybrids and you're thinking, oh, it's going to be running around on petrol, it's a petrol engine, it's not. It's much, much cleaner than that. It's not an ideal solution. We want to charge them, we want to run them on EV. They run much nicer. And if we can get the charging infrastructure, which we'll come to, but that's a key point that many people miss. And obviously it's not Steve Garlick's, remit. He views it as a hybrid. It's not. I think it's absolutely clear that everybody's fully aware of that. Thank you.
Can I ask a question on the London Electric Vehicle Company? Because taxi drivers have been getting in touch with me over this as well about the fact that they're refusing to support drivers with critical component failures. What have you heard about this, and what are your concerns, and how is this going to impact perhaps even driver retention in the future years?
It was certainly an issue a few months back with spare parts. There's a part on it called an ERAD, an electric rear axle drive. There was issues in getting spares for that. Those market suppliers have come back. Across the automotive industry, and if you Google it, it will come up, there are spares problems for all sorts of vehicles at the moment. Initially it was blamed on the war in Ukraine, then it was blamed on Brexit and all sorts of things, but there are spares issues for many, many vehicles, and certainly not just the TXE. At the moment, the supply chain, the spares supply chain, is actually pretty much up and running as normal. So the issues that we had with not being able to get ERADs, there was another few components you couldn't get as well. There was a bit on the door. Those parts are now coming back into supply. So the supply issue that was there are still issues now and then, but it's not as bad as it was.
So you don't think it's causing any kind of financial issues for you? You think they are, Grant?
I do.
Yeah.
I do, because we got members who's got parts broken on their LEV vehicles, and there's no parts coming in, and they're sitting at home watching daytime TV. And for anyone who's ever watched daytime TV, that's not a good look. That's no good. Yeah, and they're sitting at home, not working, going skint, while they're waiting for parts to come over from China. And that's the problem. When you've got a monopoly, that's what you've got.
That's actually what I want to ask you. They have got a monopoly, haven't they? And is that a problem? And do we need to start pushing for there to be a breakdown of this monopoly on this issue here?
Well, I'm probably going to be the only one on this table that's not au fait with a monopoly. Over the years, we've had a Mercedes Vito come into London. We've had a Nissan Dynamo come into London, and knocking on the door is a full maxi cab, fully electric, but it don't reach the turning circle. I think it's from 1907. But again, that's probably up to the drivers and up to TfL.
Yeah,
I mean, if you've got a monopoly, I speak to the garages and the fleets, and there was a time when the cost of the vehicle was going up £1,200 every quarter. and fleet owners. And I think you've had Asher Moses here once in front of City Hall, and he said that he just cannot afford to buy any more taxis to rent out.
So
it
if
is
you've
the
got
cost.
financially stranded taxi drivers, and Trevor, you might want to come in as well, but are they getting any support financially if they're in these positions at all? Is there any support at all for them?
I do want to come in and, you know, Grant and Steve have mentioned lots of things and touched on Scotland, and I think that could be looked at, because in Scotland taxi drivers can get an interest-free loan off the Scottish government to purchase the taxis. Now, the emotive issue of the TXE, and I heard what Grant said, and he's right, we've had vetoes, we had the Dynamo, but they were what you would call they were compliant with this conditions of fitness. They had a turning circle. Now, whether you like that or not, we have a strict conditions of fitness. We have a turning. First of all and foremost, you've got to have a partition between the driver and the member of the public. Secondly, it's got to be wheelchair accessible, side on, not at the boot. Thirdly, it's got to be able to do a turning circle of 8,535. Then it's got to have a flat floor with no minimum height because of wheelchairs in the back. Now, all that is for the public. It's not there for any other reason. It's for the public. For those members of the public we sometimes forget about, those who can't get around as good and as easy as us who are able-bodied. So with all them conditions of fitness that are in place, they're there for one reason, as I said, for the public. So just by them conditions of fitness, they will restrict the number of manufacturers who can produce that vehicle. That's because we're a shrinking market. If you look at the taxi numbers of, say, let's be generous and say there's 15,000, who's going to invest millions to produce this vehicle that meets all of them conditions? So yes, we have a very expensive vehicle. Grant is right. When we had the old TXs, they were in the £45,000 range. But EVs are expensive vehicles anyway. My wife, when she was driving a Duke and petrol, it was 14,000, 15,000. Now she's upgraded to an electric vehicle, you're looking at 30,000. So the vehicle's always going to be expensive because of the standards that it has to reach. Now, London taxis are identified around the world. You can show Rostat and people in Amsterdam, New York, even in Beijing and Tokyo, we'll be able to say that's a London taxi. If you put two vehicles alongside, because it's funny how we talk about monopolies, but no one wants to talk about the absolute monopoly we have got, the regulated monopoly about our working practices, but we're more worried about the vehicle. If you put two vehicles exactly the same alongside and say because let's be honest, if we start lowering our standards and having any vehicle in, then we'll be driving exactly the same as private hire. And the 98 Act under Section 7 is quite specific. And do I have to read? I think I might as well. You can tell that I'm in an organisation, and Steve touched on it, about women underrepresented. Well, in the UCG, my organisation, the Deputy General Secretary is a woman, our chair's a woman, a lot of our members are, so I don't get the opportunity to get a word in, so I'm taking it today. So the Act is quite clear.
Yeah.
This is not the defence of LEVC, it's an expensive vehicle, but it would be an expensive vehicle no matter what we talk about. The Act says it is not such a design and appearance as would lead any person to believe that that vehicle is a London cab. So that in itself says it's got to be identifiable. It cannot be the same as everything else.
Thank you.
Now, when we talk about there is a vehicle everyone wants to talk about, do away with a turning circle, which is, I say, ballot every taxi driver. Because I believe the majority view is we don't want to lose our identity in purpose-built vehicle. But if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'll accept that if that's democracy. But a vehicle that they want to do to maybe can come into our market that is a converted van is also 5 metres bigger than the TXE, which is has a big impact on the ranks. If it has no turning circle, it means we'd have to look at moving ranks because you wouldn't be able to do that one movement. And lastly, and most importantly, because we don't like monopolies, is £70,000. £2,000 dearer than the lowest entry TXE. So I've only had, as I said earlier on, I've only had a comprehensive school education, but how is that a benefit for us? We do away with one of our conditions for their standards for the public to pay either the same or even more money. So no, I'm not happy with the price of the LEVC. No one would be. But it is a limited market. It's a niche market. And unfortunately, we're not a private vehicle. We're a London taxi.
Yeah, I love talking to taxi drivers. I could listen to you forever.
Yeah.
You're iconic, you're amazing. Let's make sure you're not becoming a tourist attraction in like a red letterbox or a telephone box. And I hope that you do get that equal support that buses, trays, tubes do here in TfL. And I'm sure that we'll be pushing for that. Thank you so much.
Thanks. I know we've...
Just quickly... VAT on charging wasn't mentioned just now. So if we could add that. We are a tiny market, 2 companies, 3 companies, never last. It's just too small a market, in my opinion. We're 15,000 drivers, hardly any sold in the rest of the UK. We are the main market. Why would Vauxhall and Ford want to spend millions? I don't see why they would. And when it's not going to last. No other taxi has lasted.
Thanks. And I know we strayed into what is a very, very complicated and contentious subject on the vehicles. We're not going to talk about that anymore. If there's any other views that you have on that you want to put us in writing, just so, you know, we may or may not then be able to pick our way through it. You're the experts. Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thank you very much, Chair. And great to hear Steve talk about the Mayor's Green Finance Fund, something I raised at the Budget Committee when we were looking at the finances last year and raised with the Deputy Mayor, Seb Dance, as an opportunity. It just seemed like an obvious one, really, in terms of if we can reduce it to zero or near zero interest cost, and you can then spread out the cost, obviously, for the purchaser, for yourself, so you can crack on and, you know, with the driving and doing your jobs. Grant, I just wanted to ask you a question in terms of you wrote in the LCDC that TfL need to develop what you said is an equitable financial policy that supports the sustainability of the black cab profession. Would these equitable financial policies, what would they look like, in your opinion?
Well, I think a lot of it is like what Steve intimated and what you've just mentioned about having cheap interest. So drivers, and again, that's why people talk about vehicles, because it's the cost. You know, to go and rent a TXE from a garage is probably $350 upwards a week, right? It's a lot of money. If I was using my family car, sticking my phone on the dashboard and becoming a private hire driver, my costs are minimal. Our costs are huge compared to that. So if there was any way that TfL say, yeah, we want this to be a green city, we want you to drive these great green vehicles, and you know what we're going to do? We're going to help you fund it. For me, that would be a step in the right direction. But we're not getting it. We're getting all stick and no carrot. And if he wants the cab trade, and we've all embraced it, people used to think, you ever see a TV show about emissions? They'd always show a little clip of the bus lane going up Euston Road with all these old black cabs spouting out diesels. They must have it on the tape somewhere. They always used it. But the black cab trade embraced the LEVC vehicle from 2018 and bought into it. I think we've got over 9,000 cabs now actually on the road, LEVC vehicles. So we've embraced it, but it all seems like the Mayor has got all these great plans, but nothing ever comes to fruition. And if we could get, like Steve was just saying, the Green Initiative, where they could say, look, if you want to buy one of these cabs, or even a second-hand one, but it's got to be, you know, EV, LEVC or whatever, and we can get you a lower rate of interest, that would, I think, go a long way into retaining the driver numbers. Because in the next 3 years, it's projected we're going to lose about 1,000 drivers a year who just cannot afford to be a cab driver anymore. And when I look at the taxi plan, I think it was point 14 that TfL are now going to consult on emissions from the tailpipe. That means that if you actually own a Euro 6 taxi diesel, the cleanest ones you can have, They're looking to bring a consultation, I believe, to put an age limit on Euro 6 diesels. And if you're talking about the tailpipe, they might even bring TXEs into that frame. So for the confidence of the cab trade, guys who are looking to buy another vehicle or keeping a vehicle, the whole cab trade is up in the air because TfL keeps sending out these messages. Going to do that, looking at that, maybe cutting that. Drivers don't know which way to move. How can you plan your business when TfL keep changing the goalposts? And, you know, I've got members like all of us who bought a vehicle and they said, right, if you have it tested once a year, 2 MOTs a year, you're going to get 15 years. Drivers thought, well, it's a lot of money, I'm going to buy it and I'm going to plan it. I'm going to plan it where it's going to be paid for and the last, say, 3 years be paid for. I'm going to put a bit of money away, if they're of that age, as a pension. Put a bit of money away for when I retire. But then all of a sudden, whoosh, the carpet's pulled from under your feet. You haven't got them extra 3 years. You've only got 12. So drivers are out on the limb. They're of an age. You look at us lot. We're no spring chickens, right? So they're, yeah, well, yeah. And so drivers' finances, right? I'm an old-looking 24, I know. But, I mean, the older drivers in the cab trade, they look at the finances and think, I just cannot afford to stay in the game and I'm going to retire, which to the detriment of Londoners, especially the disabled, because it means every 1,000 cabs coming off the road, there's 1,000 left taxis for wheelchair users. You know, that's a very important point. We're the only industry that's fully 100% waive, right, at our cost. And I believe we don't get the recognition for that in London, for what we do and what we bring to the table.
Thanks, Grant. I mean, yeah, absolutely echo what others have said. I mean, we all know it's the iconic symbol of London, really, isn't it? And wherever you go in the world, people know it and love it. And I think the Steve, just going back to you there, the challenges you raised, and you said we haven't touched on them yet, and unfortunately I don't think we've got the time to necessarily go into it, but it'd be really good to perhaps get in something in from writing from yourselves in terms of some of the other challenges around moving to electric, because clearly, you know, we're in a climate crisis emergency. We need to make sure that every single factor of public transport across London, we're moving that way. And if we can use the Green Finance Fund, that's going to hopefully be a big lever, but obviously you want to make sure that you can operate properly. And if you're working all day, driving all day in that vehicle, you need to be able to make sure you've got the range and all the rest of it, that in terms of plug-in points. It'd be really good to just see what some of the other challenges you might have in terms of moving everybody on to fully electric.
Yeah, so again, you've probably all heard me say this, but we should have been the poster boys for the EV transition. The vehicle came out in 2018, and up to the pandemic, we were adopting the electric vehicles at a rate faster than we transitioned from horses to petrol motor-drawn in 1906 or whenever it was. That is the rate that we've transitioned to electric. Over 65% of our fleet is currently EV. And that's come about despite the fact that for 2 years during the pandemic, nobody bought a cab because basically we was all unemployed. So to get from a position in 2018 when we never had a vehicle to buy to where we are now at 65%, and had it not been for the pandemic, I honestly think we'd have been a lot higher. The only restrictions now are, as you've heard, the cost of the vehicle, finance, etc. But it's not just that, it's the other things that we're doing, again, that we don't get the recognition for. So one of the problems with the anti-vehicle lobby will tell you is, oh yeah, you can run electric vehicles, but it doesn't deal with the other particulates, so it doesn't deal with tyre wear, with brake wear, that all goes into the atmosphere and all of that. So what we've done in the taxi trade, we've been working very closely with a firm called Enzo. They make the world's first green tyre. And as crazy as it seems, this tyre doesn't wear as quickly as others. It doesn't put off the particulates. It gives the vehicle more range on the battery because it's less resistance, less rolling and all that. And it's been incredibly successful. And as a result of that, I saw the press release last week that they're now making those tyres available to Tesla and Ford and everybody else as well to use it. We did it first. We tested the vehicle. We're now using the technology to do it. We do everything we can. Nobody has stepped up to the plate of greening up vehicle emissions in this city more than we have. The delivery industry hasn't done it. The motorbike courier industry hasn't done it. The private hire industry certainly haven't done it. We're the people who have stepped up to do it. We're the people who have put our own money into it. The amount of money we've put into it, I've normally got this figure, it's hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds that individual taxi drivers and small businesses in London have put into cleaning up the fleet. We should have been the poster boys for the whole campaign. We weren't. It's not too late. We still could be. But it's getting to the crucial stage now, with all the stuff you've heard. We just need a little bit of help. We just need to be able to keep doing what we're doing. We're not asking for the world. The key factors, to do a very quick summation on this, the things that we need help with the finance, the stuff I've already gone into. But one of the key issues that we need is access to the road network. Right, have we got that? I thought we were running out of time. Sorry, I was just going to do me a quick spill. I'll wait till you ask.
I was worried about the time that I wanted to talk about particular door-to-door service and all that.
Yeah, so we basically, our last question, we did want to have a little bit more time about this, and I'll ask you, so you've got your choice. But anything you don't get to say, please, please, please do put in writing. It's not that we don't want to hear about it. Is it all right if we ask about road access, Pete?
That's exactly what...
Oh, there we are, yeah.
Yeah. OK, so access. Access is something that keeps coming up. Peter, you raised it at the very beginning when you first started. Steve has raised it with me multiple times. Now, I've been asked to ask you to write to us with your responses on this because we've got so little time left. But basically, it's what are the steps that you think that TfL could be taking to make sure that, you know, you've got your accessible vehicles, which are a huge asset to disabled Londoners, and what are the steps you need TfL to take to ensure that you've got access, for instance, to bus lanes, and you're all wanting to put your hands up. Chair, are they allowed to answer, or can they do it in writing?
So what I'm going to suggest is 3 Assembly members here have got questions on this subject. Can you ask them all? And then I'm going to ask you all to, basically say 2 lines on it and everything else in writing. It's all on access. I know it's a big subject. We've basically run out of time. Can I ask you to do that, Bassam, and then...
Yep. Just very quickly follow up on that. So one of the challenges with bus lanes and using them at the moment is obviously the illegal parking. We get blocking the bus lanes. Just in terms of how much of that is an issue for you, and in terms of the challenge at the moment is for local authorities to be able to enforce against that. Just, you know, what are you finding from the trade in terms of being able to use those bus lanes that you're able to use? The second bit was just, obviously, cabbies, you've all got an opinion on everything. So just wanted to ask you, TfL roads, the bus lanes, motorbikes are allowed to use them. On most borough roads, they're not. Do you have any opinion in terms of how you see it from your point of view on that? There? But again, both those.
Yeah. And my question was just about engagement with boroughs. You obviously have regular engagement with TfL, whether it's productive or not. I think there's different views on that. But do you have to say any mechanisms to engage with boroughs at all, either on a London Council's-wide basis or when individual schemes are going in at all? That's my question.
And 1 second more, Assembly Member Tyrrell.
Very quickly, my question was on taxi ranks. I know in Bromley we've got a big problem with delivery drivers and things like that blocking up the taxi ranks, and they're not able to be enforced because these riders get very aggressive to the enforcement officers. The action plan doesn't mention dealing with that or using its conveying powers, and I wanted your views on that.
OK, we will put all of those questions in writing, but if you want to have a couple of sentences just on all those subjects, if you can manage it, we've got to finish at 1 o'clock, though. Peter.
Long sentences. Door-to-door service was mentioned by Seb Dance and Andy Lord in the introduction. There's no door-to-door service. There is, in theory, there's no door-to-door. You turn up with a woman who's very ill from hospital. They live 200 yards down that road. Do you want me to take you there? Yes. It costs you £20 more. It costs you £10 more. No. And they struggle along. Absolutely not. Road access is the key. Reducing fares, Tottenham Court Road, left into Euston Road. Buses can do it, cycles can do it, we can't. How ridiculous. London Bridge to Liverpool Street Station, this is TfL Road, we are not allowed there. Instead of it costing £7, £10, it costs £15, £20. Who on earth, unless you're somebody with a disability or a family with lots of children, you have to do it, and they have to get those vehicles. We talk about taxis, people talk about taxis are too expensive. Personally, I don't think they're too expensive at all. They're about right. But as long as we've got access to the roads, and we need Sadiq Khan, the GLA, TfL, TPH to allow us in. Why on earth are we not allowed in Fleet Street bus lane? How ridiculous. And we also need Sadiq Khan, GLA, taxi app regulation, cross-border hiring, just like Andy Burnham is bashing the table. We've met him many times. We met with Louise Haigh. Unfortunately, she's no longer the Secretary of State for Transport. Somebody else is. We all know who it is. And it's all gone quiet on cross-border hiring since that happened. So, door-to-door, it's an anomaly. It's technically true, but it doesn't happen. You don't get somebody to their door when they really need to, and that's what we should be doing. Sorry.
That's really helpful. That's really helpful.
Apologise.
Trevor, can you take up the challenge of doing that shorter than Pete did?
No. But
we are going to have to finish at 1 o'clock.
About the cycle.
Need a buzzer.
I would try to be as quick as possible. I don't think it's my place to comment about cyclists, bikes in the bus lane. I think that needs to be Joanne's question. The mayor, this mayor, wrote us out of the East Transport plans. So by writing us out, the councils, all the local boroughs, work on what is in the mayor's transport strategy. And because we're not in there, you have to make an extra argument of why we should be, because the mayor has written us out of our own history. Thomas touched on people parking in bus lanes, and taxi ranks. Well, I'll do both the same. Let's do the taxi ranks first, because I've looked at Thomas.
Remember, you can put this in writing.
But TfL, in a city of 9 million, and this is really important because they are a world-class regulator, they have got 6 warranted compliant officers to deal with a city of 9 million. So they can't do nothing. And lastly, Peter touched on about access. Well, I'll just end with this then, because in 2019, I've got it all written down, because I don't really bluff this rubbish. I mean it. So 2019, the DfT stated that taxis play an essential role in enabling people disabled people to complete door-to-door journeys. So that's the answer there. Buses and taxis should have access to the roads, allowing those people who are vulnerable, to get a door-to-door service.
Hammersmith and Fulham. Look at Hammersmith and Fulham. I forgot to say it. They do it.
Seriously, we're now officially out of time. How quick can you be?
Right, just quickly, getting back to where we started, the knowledge. We do the knowledge to take you from A to B. Like I said, to get from A to B now, I have to go B, C, D, E, F, G and back. We should be door-to-door service for all Londoners. OK? That's why we do the knowledge. We should be exempt. When you look, there's not that many of us. If every council said you can use LTNs, you're not going to get gridlock traffic. You're just not, because of the numbers. And I just think it wouldn't be amiss of this mayor to do something positive for us and say that we can use LTNs and bus lanes. The biggest one being Bishopsgate is horrendous. I get people in my cab, businessmen, they want to know why their office is up there and I have to drop them here and it's raining, and they got a £3,000 suit on from New York, and I say, well, I can get you round the houses, take about 15 minutes. You know, it's just ludicrous. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Grant. Steve.
Yeah, the key point is in the is action point 7. Sorry, action point 1. The TfL's general policy is to allow us in, except in certain. It's the absolute failure in the action plan. We should be in unless we're absolutely. There's really good reasons for keeping us out, not the other way. We're in, presuming there's not. It should be the default position should be we're in. The mayor needs to set that. The boroughs then follow that policy. We then get access to the boroughs. He needs to set some of the schemes that are funded. The LTNs are funded by the mayor. It's quite straightforward. If I'm funding it, you allow taxis in. It's really that easy. And the really crucial point, we're instantly recognisable. TfL have got a database of vehicles. The ANPR cameras recognise us. It's so easy to put us in. London councils follow the mayor's lead. They should be given a directive that this is what we do, this is the policy. Solves an awful lot of the problems that the taxi action plan. Most of this wouldn't be needed if we were given the access to the road network that we should be.
Thank you very much, and thanks for almost sticking to time. No, look, seriously, thank you so much. You know, we've heard everything. We haven't covered everything, but please, anything that you want to say, put it in writing, you know, and what's come away really for me, that you know, the emphasis that this is a job London's used to aspire to and work hard for, and, you know, a good, stable future, and they knew they would be able to earn and provide for their family, and that's something that's not there, and it's something we do understand, and so, you know, much appreciate that's come through loud and clear. And so thank you to your guests for responses. You're free to leave, but it's only going to take me a couple of seconds to get through all the rest. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting? Can I ask the committee to note its work programme and meeting dates as agreed by the London Assembly at its annual meeting on the 6th of May 2025? The next meeting of the committee is scheduled for the 17th of June 2025 at 10 a.m. in the Chamber in City Hall. There is no urgent business. Thank you. This meeting is now closed.
This is the broadcast.